There is a special kind of silence that exists only in the deepest parts of the ocean, a quiet so profound it feels ancient. It is in that silence that some of history's greatest stories are buried, not in gold or treasure, but in mystery. For as long as humans have built boats, we have felt the pull of the horizon, a deep-seated need to see what lies beyond the edge of the map. But the sea, in all its majestic beauty, is a keeper of secrets. It gives adventures, but it rarely gives back its lost souls. Today, we are setting sail into that very fog of history, embarking on a voyage to uncover the fates of those who dared to venture into the great unknown and vanished, leaving behind only whispers, legends, and questions that have echoed for centuries. Think for a moment about the sheer courage it must have taken to point a wooden ship into a seemingly endless expanse of water, guided by the stars and little more than a hope that land lay somewhere beyond the curve of the earth. These were not just sailors, they were the astronauts of their age, pushing the boundaries of the known world. Their journeys were fueled by ambition, by a thirst for knowledge, and sometimes by the search for mythical lands like Atlantis or the fabled riches of El Dorado. But for every successful voyage that entered the history books, there were countless others that simply disappeared. Entire fleets, seasoned explorers, and advanced civilizations seemed to evaporate into the salt spray, becoming the ghost stories that would haunt the oceans forever. This video is our map to those ghost stories. We have gathered 25 of the most captivating and perplexing legends of ancient sea voyages and the lost explorers who command them. We will chart courses to mythical continents that were once drawn on parchment, follow the trails of advanced seafaring cultures whose skills baffle modern historians, and piece together the final, terrifying moments of crews who sailed into storms from which they never returned. This is more than a list. It is an expedition into the heart of human curiosity and the price of ambition. So, find a comfortable spot because we are about to dive deep into tales of incredible courage, spine-tingling mystery, and the endless, alluring call of the unknown sea. Our journey begins not with a single ship, but with an entire navy, a symbol of imperial power that simply evaporated into the mists of time. We travel back to the age of the pyramids, but not the ones you're thinking of. This is the 5th dynasty of ancient Egypt, around 2487 BC, a time when Pharaoh Sahure ruled from his sun-baked palace. Unlike his predecessors who focused on monumental tombs, Sahure is celebrated in history as ancient Egypt's first great seafaring pharaoh. The evidence for this is chiseled into the very walls of his own pyramid complex at Abusia, where intricate reliefs depict a scene of staggering prosperity. A massive fleet of sleek, sea-going ships, their sails billowing, returning from a legendary land known as Punt. These carvings show holds overflowing with sacks of fragrant myrrh, stacks of precious ebony wood, piles of gleaming gold, and even exotic animals like monkeys and dogs, all tribute from a successful voyage to what was essentially the ends of the known world. The destination, the land of Punt, was a place of almost mythical status for the Egyptians, a faraway source of incredible wealth and rare goods, believed to be located somewhere along the coast of the Red Sea, possibly in the region of modern-day Somalia or Eritrea. The journey itself was a monumental undertaking. We can piece together that Sahure's fleet, consisting of ships built from cedar planks imported from Byblos, would have sailed from a port on the Red Sea coast. They would have navigated south, following the treacherous coastline, a voyage that could take many months. The reliefs celebrate their triumphant return, a testament to Egyptian maritime prowess. But here is where the historical record falls silent and the legend begins. What if the fleet depicted in those triumphant carvings never actually made it home? The legend whispered through the centuries claims that this very fleet, the pride of Pharaoh Sahure, vanished without a trace on its return voyage. Imagine the scene in the royal court. The expectation would have been immense. Spotters would have been posted, awaiting the sight of those familiar sails on the horizon. Days would have turned into weeks and weeks into months. The celebration planned for their return would have slowly turned to a grim, uneasy silence. An entire fleet, along with its seasoned sailors, its precious cargo, and its commanders, had been swallowed by the sea. The economic and psychological blow to the kingdom must have been devastating. This was not just a loss of wealth, it was a loss of divine favor, a sign that the gods had turned their backs. So, what could have happened to such a powerful group of ships? Theorists have proposed several chilling possibilities. One is the sheer, unpredictable fury of the sea. The Red Sea, and especially the Mediterranean if they attempted a longer route, are prone to sudden, violent storms that can whip up with little warning. A single tempest could have scattered and smashed the wooden vessels against rocky shores, leaving no survivors to tell the tale. Another, more intriguing theory involves the shadowy figures known to history as the Sea Peoples. This mysterious coalition of maritime raiders would, centuries later, threaten the entire Bronze Age world, collapsing empires. Could an early, rogue faction of these seafaring warriors have encountered Sahure's fleet, overwhelming them in a fierce naval battle far from any witnesses? The Egyptian records would never have recorded such a defeat. It was common practice to chisel away failures from history to only immortalize victories. The silent, empty docks awaiting the fleet that never returned remain one of history's earliest and most profound maritime mysteries. A reminder that even at the dawn of civilization, the ocean was the ultimate arbiter of fate. Moving from the sun-scorched docks of ancient Egypt, we now sail northwest to the windswept, rugged coast of Cornwall in England, where a different kind of legend sleeps beneath the cold, grey waters of the Celtic Sea. Here, the mist seems to cling with a particular tenacity, and the locals will tell you that on a quiet evening, if you listen closely over the crash of the waves, you can almost hear the ghostly church bells ringing from a kingdom lost to time. This is the haunting tale of Lyonesse, a land of myth and melancholy that stretches the very boundary between history and folklore. The legend paints a picture of a veritable paradise. Lyonesse was said to be a low-lying, fertile land that stretched from the western tip of Cornwall all the way to the Isles of Scilly, some 30 miles out to sea. It wasn't just a simple tract of land, it was a prosperous kingdom, dotted with no less than 140 thriving parishes, each with its own church spire reaching for the sky. This was a land of forests, fields, and a single great city. In the great cycle of Arthurian legend, Lyonesse is most famously known as the home of Tristan, the tragic hero of Tristan and Isolde, and was ruled by his father, King Meliodas. It was a place of knights, chivalry, and courtly love, a vibrant part of the Arthurian world, but its fate was written in water. The stories say that the sea did not slowly encroach upon Lyonesse. Instead, it was a cataclysm of biblical proportions, a single, terrifying night of monstrous storms and tidal waves that swallowed the entire kingdom whole. The inhabitants had no warning, no time to flee. The tales speak of a lone survivor, a man named Trevelyan, who galloped ahead of the rising waves on a white horse, reaching the safety of higher ground at Peranothno just as the sea consumed everything behind him. But where does legend end and geological history begin? The fascinating aspect of Lyonesse is that it may not be pure fantasy. The area between Cornwall and the Isles of Scilly is in fact a vast submerged landscape known as the Celtic Shelf. During the last ice age, when sea levels were significantly lower, this entire area was dry land, a rolling plain connecting what are now separate islands to the mainland. As the glaciers melted thousands of years ago, sea levels rose steadily, gradually flooding this low-lying plain. While the process was generally slow, there is compelling evidence for much more rapid and catastrophic flooding events in the region. The early medieval period, around the 5th or 6th century, saw a combination of factors: a sustained rise in sea levels coupled with a series of powerful storm surges and possibly even tsunamis triggered by underwater landslides or earthquakes. Such an event could have devastated coastal communities, wiping out entire villages in a single night and permanently altering the coastline. This would have been a traumatic, world-altering event for the people living there, an experience so profound it became etched into the cultural memory, evolving over generations into the epic legend we know today. The legend of Lyonesse, therefore, stands as a powerful example of how folklore can serve as a vessel for historical truth. It is not a precise history book, but rather a poetic and emotional record of a real geological and human disaster. The 140 churches might be an exaggeration, but they could represent the number of communities lost to the rising waters. The name Trevelyan, the lone survivor, is even the name of an old Cornish family, suggesting a possible root in a real historical figure. So, when you look out from the cliffs of Land's End towards the churning sea, you are not just gazing at empty water. You are looking at what was once a home, a landscape that real people farmed and lived upon. The story of Lyonesse is the echo of their loss, a kingdom that truly did sink beneath the waves, leaving behind only the sound of bells on the wind and a legend that reminds us of the immense power of the sea to reshape our world and our stories. From the sunken fields of Lyonesse, we now turn our sails toward a different kind of horizon, one not of loss but of breathtaking possibility. Our next legend takes us away from kingdoms swallowed by the sea and toward a voyage that dared to cross it, a journey that stretches the limits of belief and begs the question, could a humble monk from the wild coasts of Ireland have discovered the New World almost 1,000 years before Columbus? This is the extraordinary story of Saint Brendan the Navigator. In the 6th century, Ireland was a beacon of learning and faith in a Europe darkened by the fall of Rome. In this world of monasteries and manuscripts, a monk named Brendan of Clonfert felt a calling that went far beyond the quiet walls of his abbey. He was consumed by a holy wanderlust, a desire to find the terra repromissionis sanctorum, the promised land of the saints, a paradise said to exist somewhere far across the Western Ocean. So, according to the legend, he and a small band of devoted brothers did the unthinkable. They built a boat called a currach. Now, imagine this vessel, not a mighty warship or a sturdy merchant galley, but a frame of slender wooden lathes lashed together and covered in stitched ox hides, made watertight with a layer of animal fat. In this fragile craft, little more than a large canoe, they supposedly set out onto the brutal, unpredictable expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. Their incredible adventure was later written down in a text called the Navigatio Sancti Brendani, or the Voyage of Saint Brendan. Reading it is like stepping into a dreamscape woven from faith and the sheer terror of the deep. The monk's journey lasts for 7 years, and their encounters are the stuff of pure fantasy. They land on an island to celebrate Easter Mass, only for the island to suddenly shudder and dive beneath the waves. It was not land at all, but a colossal sea monster known as Jasconius. They sail past mountains that spew fire and encounter crystal pillars floating in the sea that may be descriptions of icebergs. They are attacked by a griffin and find an island of smiths where cyclopean figures hurl molten rock at them. For centuries, these tales were dismissed as pious fables, beautiful metaphors for a spiritual quest. But in the 20th century, a fascinating question emerged. What if these fantastical details were not mere inventions, but garbled accounts of real, astonishing geographical discoveries? This is the heart of the debate that surrounds Saint Brendan. Could the story of the Navigatio be a distorted memory of an actual transatlantic voyage? Proponents of this theory point to some startling clues. The island of sheep and the paradise of birds described in the text could correspond to the Faroe Islands and Iceland, which were being settled by Irish monks known as Papar around this time. The crystal pillars in the sea are a perfect description of icebergs which the monks would have encountered if they sailed near Greenland. The mountain that spewed fire could be a volcano in Iceland. And the ultimate destination, the Promised Land, with its lush vegetation and great river, sounds remarkably like the coastline of North America. The timeline is compelling. If Irish monks had reached Iceland by the 8th century, as historical records suggest, it is not a huge leap to imagine that a particularly daring seafarer like Brendan could have used the stepping stones of the North Atlantic, island hopping from Ireland to the Faroes, then to Iceland, then to Greenland, and finally to Newfoundland centuries before the Vikings set foot on Vinland. To test this incredible hypothesis, modern adventurers have taken the legend to the sea itself. In 1976, a man named Tim Severin constructed a full-size, exact replica of a 6th century currach, which he named the Brendan. Using only materials available to the saint, like oak, ash, and 49 ox hides tanned with oak bark, he and his crew set out to see if such a boat could actually survive the transatlantic crossing. Their journey was fraught with peril. They battled storms and feared that the hide covering would be torn apart by ice or rot in the saltwater. Yet the Brendan proved to be an incredibly seaworthy vessel, flexible and resilient in the massive Atlantic swells. After a voyage of just over a year, Tim Severin and his crew successfully landed in Newfoundland, demonstrating conclusively that such a journey was technologically possible. While Severin's expedition didn't prove that St. Brendan actually made the trip, it shattered the argument that he couldn't have. It transformed the legend from a fantasy into a plausible, if still unproven, historical event. The story of St. Brendan remains a powerful testament to human courage and curiosity, a tale where faith literally built a boat and sailed into the great unknown, leaving behind a mystery that continues to captivate historians and explorers to this day. But if the story of St. Brendan is one of a small boat achieving the impossible, our next legend presents the absolute opposite, a maritime endeavor of such staggering scale and power that its sudden disappearance from history remains one of the most perplexing what-ifs ever recorded. We travel now to the dawn of the 15th century, to the height of the Ming dynasty in China, a civilization that was, by any measure, the most advanced on Earth. And at the command of the emperor was a man who orchestrated a spectacle that would dwarf all European exploration for generations, Admiral Zheng He and his legendary treasure fleet. To understand the sheer magnitude of this operation, you have to picture it. Imagine a fleet of over 300 ships, a floating city of wood and silk. Among them were the colossal treasure ships, the giants of the age. Historical accounts suggest these vessels were over 400 feet long. To put that in perspective, Christopher Columbus's flagship, the Santa Maria, was a mere 85 feet. These were 9-masted behemoths with luxurious cabins and decks large enough to hold entire companies of soldiers. They were accompanied by hundreds of support vessels, horse ships carrying cavalry, troop transports, supply barges, and massive water tankers. This was not a fleet built for discovery in the European sense. It was a fleet designed for projection, for awe. Its mission was to sail the Western Seas, a vast expanse reaching from Southeast Asia all the way to the eastern coast of Africa, and to bring over 36 kingdoms and sultanates into the Ming tributary system, demonstrating the unparalleled majesty and power of the Chinese emperor. Under Admiral Zheng He, a remarkable man who rose from being a captured child eunuch to the master of the seas, this fleet completed 7 epic voyages between 1405 and 1433. They sailed to what is now Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia. They negotiated in the ports of India and Sri Lanka. They even reached the Arabian Peninsula and the coast of Africa, returning with astonishing gifts for the emperor: giraffes, zebras, ostriches, and exotic spices, all interpreted as tribute from distant lands acknowledging Chinese superiority. The fleet's voyages were meticulously recorded in detailed logs, maps, and star charts, creating a repository of geographical knowledge that was the envy of the world. And then, abruptly, it all stopped. After the 7th voyage, the entire enterprise was shut down. the great ships were left to rot in their harbors. And in a move that feels like historical self-sabotage, the court officials of the new emperor ordered the destruction of most of the fleet's records. The greatest navy the world had ever seen was deliberately erased from memory. Why would a civilization at the peak of its power simply turn its back on the world? The answer lies in a dramatic political shift within the Forbidden City. The Voyages were the pet project of the Yongle Emperor, a man with a grand vision of a global Chinese empire. But after his death, a new faction gained influence, conservative Confucian scholars who saw these extravagant voyages as a colossal waste of resources. They argued that the money spent on building and maintaining the fleet was better used for domestic projects, like fortifying the Great Wall against northern threats like the Mongols. To them, the outside world held nothing of value compared to the stability and integrity of the homeland. They saw the fleet as a corrupting influence, bringing strange ideas and unnecessary luxuries. So they systematically dismantled the entire maritime program, burning the logs and charts to ensure no future emperor could easily revive it. China chose isolation over expansion, turning inward for centuries to come. This deliberate act of forgetting is what fuels our modern mystery, because with the official records destroyed, we are left with enormous gaps. We know the fleet's general routes, but what about the ships that may have been lost to storms or that ventured off course? This is where the legend truly ignites. Some researchers and historians have put forward a tantalizing, if highly controversial, theory that parts of Zheng He's fleet, perhaps separated from the main armada, did not turn back. Could they have sailed east across the Pacific, reaching the Americas decades before Columbus? The evidence offered is fragmentary but intriguing. They point to ancient Chinese maps that seem to show a landmass resembling North America. They highlight purported archaeological finds, like a supposed stone anchor found off the California coast that some claim is of Chinese design, or mysterious old inscriptions that resemble Chinese characters. The most famous is the so-called Bimini Road, a submerged rock formation in the Bahamas that some believe resembles a man-made pier or dock. Mainstream archaeology largely dismisses these claims, attributing the anchors to 19th-century Chinese fishermen and the inscriptions to natural erosion or wishful thinking. The lack of any concrete evidence from the massive treasure, ships themselves no wrecks, no Chinese artifacts definitively dated to that period in the Americas, makes the theory a tough sell. Yet the idea persists because of its sheer romantic appeal. It speaks to a lost opportunity of world-altering proportions. Imagine an alternate history where it was Chinese junks, not Spanish caravels, that first made sustained contact with the New World. The cultural and technological exchange would have been unimaginably different. The disappearance of the treasure fleet is therefore a double mystery, the historical puzzle of why it was so thoroughly eradicated from China's own story, and the speculative wonder of what its incredible ships might have yet discovered if they had been allowed to sail on. Yet, from the grand ambitions of a global empire, we now turn our attention to a much smaller, yet infinitely more elusive speck on the map. This legend speaks not to power but to obsession, the haunting, persistent dream of a place that was drawn on charts for hundreds of years, visited by credible witnesses, and yet never truly existed. We venture now into the fog-shrouded waters of the North Atlantic in pursuit of the most famous phantom island of them all, High Brassel. Unlike the sunken kingdom of Lyonesse, which was a land lost to the sea, High Brassel was an island that was perpetually found, only to vanish again when anyone tried to approach. Its story begins in the world of medieval cartography. On maps dating as far back as the 1400s, a perfectly circular island appears consistently to the west of Ireland. Its name has various spellings: Brassel, High Brassel, O Brassel, and is thought to derive from the Irish Uí Bresail, meaning descendants of Bresil, a clan name that evokes ancient Celtic kingship. What's fascinating is its persistence. For centuries, across maps made by Spanish, Italian, and English cartographers, this circular island holds its place. It wasn't just a decorative flourish. Sailors and mapmakers genuinely believed it was there, a fixed point in the trackless ocean. The legends surrounding Hy Brasil were as rich as they were strange. Some tales described it as a place of advanced beings, a civilization that possessed incredible knowledge and lived in a city of gold. Others painted it as a kind of Celtic Eden, an island of perpetual happiness free from death and disease. The most pervasive myth, however, was that it was a gateway to the otherworld, the Celtic realm of the gods and the dead. It was said that the island was normally invisible, cloaked in an impenetrable mist, but that it revealed itself to mortal eyes for one single day every 7 years. This specific detail made the legend all the more tantalizing and, for sailors, strangely credible. A captain could return to port with a wild story of seeing a mysterious island, and rather than being called a liar, people would nod and say he was simply one of the lucky few to be there on the right day. And these weren't just stories told by drunken sailors. There are numerous well-documented accounts from seemingly reliable sources. Perhaps the most famous comes from a man named John Cabot, the famed explorer who himself discovered parts of North America. After one of his voyages, he reported that his crew had sighted the legendary island, and he even claimed that the waters around Hy Brasil were so rich with cod that his men could simply lower baskets over the side and haul them up full of fish. This report fueled even more interest, combining the promise of a mythical land with the very real, tangible reward of abundant fishing grounds. The lure became so powerful that several organized expeditions were launched to find it. In the 1600s, a Captain John Nisbet from Ireland claimed he and his crew were becalmed near the island's supposed location when the mist suddenly lifted. They allegedly landed, spent a day on Hy Brasil, and met an old, wise man who gave them gold and silver. Another expedition, led by a Captain Alexander Johnson, claimed to have not only found the island but to have verified Nisbet's story. These reports kept the dream alive for generations. So, what were these experienced sailors actually seeing? Modern science offers several compelling explanations for the Phantom Island. The most likely culprit is a complex meteorological phenomenon known as a superior mirage. This occurs when a temperature inversion, a layer of warm air sitting on top of cold air, bends light rays, making distant objects appear to float high above the horizon. A remote but real island like Rockall or even the coast of Greenland could have been magnified and distorted by these conditions, creating the illusion of a large, mysterious landmass where none existed. Once the atmospheric conditions changed, the mirage would dissolve, explaining the island's famous habit of vanishing. Another theory points to a navigational error. The Porcupine Bank, a shallow submarine shelf about 120 miles west of Ireland, rises to within 200 meters of the surface. In certain sea conditions, the water over the bank can change color dramatically, appearing lighter than the deep ocean around it. A tired crew longing for land might have mistaken this vast, shallow patch for the coastline of an island lying just beneath the waves. The final, documented search for Hy Brasil took place as late as the 1870s, when an exasperated admiralty, tired of the legend complicating their charts, commissioned the vessel HMS Argus to sail a grid pattern over the island's last reported coordinates. They found nothing but open ocean, thousands of meters deep. With that final official denial, Hy Brasil was officially stricken from all navigational maps. But its legacy is more profound than a simple cartographic error. Hy Brasil represents something fundamental about the age of exploration, the power of hope. In an era when maps were filled with blank spaces labeled "Here be dragons," the human mind had a tendency to fill those voids with wonders. The legend of Hy Brasil was a projection of every sailor's deepest desire, for refuge, for riches, and for a world more magical than the one they knew. It was a dream drawn in ink on parchment, a siren's call that led men across the waves, proving that sometimes the most powerful discoveries are not of land, but of the limitless capacity for wonder that lies within us. While the legends of High Brasil speak to the power of mirage and hope, our next story is anchored in the hard, brutal reality of military history, a tale of triumph instantly undone by the fury of the elements. We travel now to the reign of Tiberius Caesar, to the year 16 AD, and to the grim, forested frontier of the Roman Empire along the Rhine River. Here, a brilliant and popular general named Germanicus Caesar sought to avenge one of the most humiliating defeats in Roman history, the annihilation of 3 legions in the Teutoburg forest 6 years earlier. His plan was not just to march through the Germanic lands, but to unleash the full, terrifying might of Rome from an unexpected direction, the sea. This is the story of the lost Roman fleet of Germanicus. To understand the sheer audacity of this endeavor, you have to picture the Roman navy. We often think of Rome as a land power of disciplined legions marching in perfect formation. But when necessary, Rome could command the waves with terrifying efficiency. Germanicus, determined to crush the Germanic chieftain Arminius, orchestrated a colossal pincer movement. While his legions marched overland, he ordered the construction of a vast fleet to sail the North Sea. The Roman historian Tacitus, our primary source for these events, describes a breathtaking mobilization. He writes that 1,000 ships were built or requisitioned. Imagine the sight along the Rhine Delta, not just a few warships, but a sprawling armada of vessels designed for a specific, brutal purpose. There were stout transport ships to carry legions of soldiers, their armor, and their supplies. There were specialized cavalry carriers, essentially floating stables for the horses. And there were the classic Roman warships, the Lyonesse, sleek and fast, powered by banks of oars and equipped with rams and towers for boarding actions. The voyage itself was a masterpiece of ancient navigation, a feat that still astounds historians. This was not the friendly, predictable Mediterranean. The North Sea was and is a treacherous body of water, known for its sudden, violent storms, powerful tides, and shifting sandbanks. Tacitus tells us that Germanicus's fleet sailed from the Rhine estuary, north along the coast of modern-day Netherlands and Germany, then east into the mouth of the Ems River. The campaign was a stunning success. The fleet landed its forces deep behind enemy lines, catching the Germanic tribes completely by surprise. Germanicus's legions fought their way to the site of the Teutoburg forest massacre, where they performed solemn burial rites for the bones of their fallen comrades, a powerful moment of psychological closure for the Roman army. Victorious, they loaded back onto the ships for the return journey, but the North Sea had not yet finished with them. It was on the return voyage that catastrophe struck. Tacitus paints a horrifying picture. A violent storm, likely an autumnal gale, descended upon the fleet with unimaginable force. The ships, heavily laden with troops and loot, were scattered across the raging sea. Some were driven onto the rocky shores of hostile coastlines, where survivors were killed or enslaved by Germanic tribes. Others were swamped and sank in the deep water. Tacitus writes of soldiers who had moments before been celebrating their victory, now clinging to wreckage or drowning under the weight of their armor. He describes scenes of sheer horror, ships burning after being struck by lightning, men pushed to cannibalism on desolate islands, and bodies washing up for weeks along the Roman-held coast. It was a disaster of epic proportions. While Germanicus himself and a portion of the fleet managed to struggle back to safety, the losses were devastating. Tacitus claims that many ships were lost, and while the exact number is debated, the psychological impact on Rome was immense. A great victory had been utterly overshadowed by a natural disaster. This historical event is not just a dramatic story. It is the starting point for one of the most exciting ongoing archaeological quests in maritime history. For centuries, the wreckage of Germanicus's fleet was considered lost forever, its wooden hulls pulverized by the sea. but in recent decades, a new focus has emerged on the Wadden Sea, the vast intertidal zone along the coasts of the Netherlands, Germany, and Denmark. This is a unique landscape of mudflats, sandbars, and shallow channels that is exposed at low tide. The theory is that some of the Roman ships, driven ashore by the storm, may have become buried in this wet, anaerobic sand environment that can preserve organic materials like wood for thousands of years. The potential is staggering. Finding even one vessel from this fleet would be an unprecedented discovery. It would provide direct evidence of Roman shipbuilding techniques adapted for northern waters. What did a Roman warship built for the North Sea look like? How was it different from a Mediterranean galley? The artifacts on board, weapons, tools, personal items of the legionaries, would offer an incredibly vivid snapshot of a Roman army on the move. The search is like looking for a needle in a haystack, but modern technology is making it possible. Archaeologists are using a combination of satellite imagery, LiDAR scans from aircraft, and magnetometer surveys from boats to detect anomalies beneath the seabed. They are looking for the telltale signs of a shipwreck, a pile of ballast stones, the distinct outline of a hull, or metal objects like anchors or weapons. Every so often, a tantalizing clue emerges. In the 1990s, fragments of a Roman-era boat were found in the Netherlands, though not definitively linked to Germanicus. More recently, discoveries of Roman artifacts like coins and military equipment in areas far beyond the traditional borders of the empire suggest that Roman influence, or at least the reach of their ships, was greater than previously believed. The hunt for the lost fleet is more than a treasure hunt. It is a quest to rewrite a chapter of history. The destruction of Germanicus's fleet was a stark reminder to Rome that even their immense power had limits dictated by the unpredictable ocean. Finding its remains would give a voice to those lost legionaries and finally confirm one of the most dramatic and tragic naval stories from the annals of the Roman Empire. Our journey now takes us to the widest stage of all, an ocean so vast it could contain every other continent combined and still have room for more. This is the Pacific, and while European explorers were still cautiously hugging coastlines, a different people were mastering its emptiness with a skill set that defies belief. We are talking about the Polynesians, whose expansion across thousands of miles of open water stands as one of humanity's most breathtaking achievements. But for all their incredible voyages, their stories always point back to a single mythical origin, a place lost to the mists of time and memory, the legendary island of Hawaii. To grasp the scale of what they accomplished, you have to forget everything you know about modern navigation. The Polynesians did not have compasses, sextants, or maps as we understand them. Their instruments were the natural world itself, and they read it with a precision that feels almost supernatural. They were master wayfinders. By day, they navigated by the sun and the mesmerizing patterns of the ocean swells. Even on cloudy days, a seasoned navigator could feel the direction of the dominant swell through the motion of the canoe, using it as a steady guide. They watched the flight paths of birds with intense focus. A bird flying out to sea in the morning and returning at night indicated land was near. They memorized the precise position of hundreds of stars, knowing which one rose and set over which island. At night, the Pacific sky was their star chart, a rotating clock of constellations that pointed the way. They even learned to detect land beyond the horizon by reading subtle signs, the way clouds gathered and darkened over an island due to its heat, or the specific reflection of shallow, green water lagoons on the underside of a cloud, a phenomenon known as loom. This deep, intimate knowledge was passed down through generations in chants, stories, and complex genealogies, and at the very heart of these oral traditions lies Hawaii. It is not just a place on a map, it is the Polynesian Eden, the ancestral homeland from which all their great migrations began. In their mythology, Hawaii is the source of life itself, the place where the gods fished the islands up from the depths of the ocean. It is described as a place of immense abundance and profound spirituality. the point of departure for the great canoes that set out to discover and populate islands from Hawaii to New Zealand to Easter Island. But this creates a fascinating historical puzzle. Was Hawaii a real, physical location that we can identify today, or is it a symbolic concept, a mythological cradle for a seafaring culture? The debate among scholars and within Polynesian communities themselves is deep and ongoing. One compelling theory points to a very real island, Savaii, in the Samoan archipelago. The linguistic connection is strong. The names Savaii, Hawaii, and Hawaii all likely stem from the same Proto-Polynesian root, Saweki, meaning homeland. It's entirely plausible that as waves of migration left the Samoa-Tonga-Fiji region, the memory of their point of origin evolved into the legendary Hawaii. Another candidate is Raiatea in the Society Islands, which holds a sacred marae or temple called Taputapuatea, a central religious site for Eastern Polynesians that could have been considered a spiritual homeland. For many, however, Hawaii transcends geography. It is seen as a metaphysical concept, the underworld and the sky world combined, the place where souls return after death. It is the eternal homeland of the spirit, not a pin on a chart. The vessel that made these epic journeys possible was as revolutionary as the navigation itself, the double-hulled canoe or wakolua. Picture two long, sleek hulls, each carved from a single massive tree trunk, connected by strong crossbeams and a central platform that could carry dozens of people, along with their plants, animals, and supplies for a voyage lasting weeks. These were not crude rafts, they were sophisticated, ocean-going crafts. With a large crab claw sail catching the wind, they could achieve remarkable speeds and, most importantly, incredible stability in the rough open ocean. The double-hull design meant they were far less likely to capsize than a single-hulled vessel. Recent recreations, most famously the Voyages of the Hokula, have proven their capabilities beyond any doubt. By sailing these replica canoes using only traditional wayfinding methods, modern Polynesians have not only revived a lost art but have physically retraced the ancient migratory routes, demonstrating that these voyages were not accidental drifts but intentional, repeatable acts of colonization. The story of the Polynesian expansion and the search for Hawaii is therefore a story of memory. It is the world's most ambitious family saga, written not on paper but in the stars and the sea. Each new island they settled became a new chapter, but the prologue was always Hawaii. This legend is a powerful reminder that a homeland is more than just a geographical location. It is the cultural and spiritual anchor of a people. For the Polynesians, Hawaii is the place where their story began, a point on the horizon that guided them across the greatest ocean on Earth, and a destination that continues to guide their understanding of who they are and where they came from. It is a legend born from the most incredible reality, proving that sometimes the greatest mysteries are not about what was lost, but about the unforgettable journey itself. But if the Polynesian saga is one of breathtaking success, our next legend serves as a stark moral counterpoint, a tale where human folly, not navigational genius, leads to a spectacular and chilling demise. We travel now to the rugged, wind-swept coast of Brittany in northwestern France, a land steeped in Celtic lore where the sea whispers a warning about the dangers of hubris and desire. This is the tragic and haunting story of the sunken city of Wise. The legend, preserved in Breton ballads and folktales, paints a picture of a place of unimaginable splendor and corruption. Wise was said to be the most beautiful city in the world, built on land that lay below sea level, nestled within a sheltered bay. To protect his magnificent creation from the raging ocean, the city's founder, King Gradlon, a pious and wise ruler, ordered the construction of an immense dike. This was no ordinary wall. It was a marvel of ancient engineering with a single, massive bronze gate that could be opened at low tide to let ships pass in and out of the harbor. The security of the entire city, however, hinged on one crucial object, a single silver key. King Gradlon kept this key on a chain around his neck, and it was the only thing that could lock the gate against the incoming tide. By day, Wise was a bustling port of immense wealth, but by night it transformed into a den of vice. The king's daughter, Princess Dahat, was the city's heart and its curse. Beautiful and wild, she was said to lead a life of debauchery, organizing lavish parties and masquerades where guests wore masks so their sins could remain anonymous. She embodied the city's sinful pride, its belief that it was untouchable, a paradise built in defiance of the natural world. The catastrophe, as it always does in such myths, arrived with a storm. One night, a handsome, mysterious knight in red armor appeared at Dahat's court. Seduced by his charm, she gave him everything he desired. He told her that the greatest treasure in the city was the silver key around her father's neck, and that to prove her love she must steal it. Under the spell of this stranger, whom many versions of the tale identify as the devil himself, Dahat crept into her father's chamber as he slept and took the key. She presented it to the Red Knight, who immediately rowed to the dike and thrust the key into the lock, flinging the great bronze gate wide open. At that very moment, the storm which had been brewing unleashed its full fury. The highest tide of the year surged through the open gate, a towering wall of water that crashed into the low-lying city. The bells of the churches rang in a futile warning as the sea poured in, swallowing streets, palaces, and temples in a single violent night. King Gradlon awoke to the chaos. Seizing his daughter, he mounted his trusty horse Morvark, a magical steed that could gallop across the waves. As they fled the drowning city, a voice boomed from the heavens, often attributed to the saintly Saint Guinevere, who had long warned the King of Wise's wickedness. The voice declared that Gradlon could only be saved if he cast aside the demon who rode behind him. Understanding the meaning, the heartbroken king had no choice. He pushed his beloved daughter, Dahat, into the raging waters where she was swallowed by the sea. Gradlon alone survived, reaching the shore a broken man to found the city of Quimper. But Wise was gone forever. To this day, Breton fishermen claim that on a quiet morning, you can still hear the ghostly church bells of Wise ringing from beneath the waves of the Bay of Douarnenez, an eternal lament for the city lost to sin. This powerful story resonates because it is not merely a local ghost tale. It is a classic flood myth with deep roots in universal themes. The narrative of a prosperous society punished for its moral decay by a cataclysmic flood echoes the biblical story of Noah and the Great Flood, as well as the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh. It serves as a cautionary parable about the dangers of excess and the belief that humanity can build a permanent fortress against the power of nature. The sea, in this legend, becomes a divine instrument of justice, cleansing the world of corruption. But could this enduring myth also contain a kernel of historical truth? Many historians and geologists believe the answer is yes, and that the legend of Wise is a folk memory of a very real coastal disaster. The proposed location for Wise is the Bay of Douarnenez, a large, shallow bay that geological surveys have shown was indeed dry land thousands of years ago. As sea levels rose at the end of the last ice age, coastal plains were gradually inundated. However, the process was not always slow. This region of Brittany is seismically active and susceptible to powerful storms and tsunami events. There is compelling evidence that a massive landslide, perhaps triggered by an earthquake, occurred in the Norwegian Sea around 6,100 years ago, known as the Storegga Slide. This event generated a tsunami that devastated coastlines across the North Sea and the North Atlantic, reaching as far as Scotland and possibly the coasts of Brittany. Such a catastrophic wave would have been utterly devastating to any prehistoric settlements along the low-lying coast, wiping them out in an instant and creating a trauma so profound it would be passed down through generations. The legend of Wise, with its specific detail of the sea rushing in through a single point, could be a cultural memory of a tsunami breaching a natural coastal barrier. The search for a physical Wise has captivated people for centuries. In the 19th century, a folklorist claimed to have seen the ruins of the city during an exceptionally low tide. More recently, sonar surveys of the Bay of Lyonesse have revealed anomalous structures on the seabed that some interpret as the remains of ancient walls or megalithic alignments. While mainstream archaeology remains skeptical, attributing these features to natural geological formations, the possibility continues to fuel the imagination. The legend of Wise endures because it operates on two powerful levels: as a timeless moral story about the consequences of sin, and as a plausible echo of a real, catastrophic event that shaped the coastline and the collective memory of the people who lived there. It reminds us that the sea not only shapes our land but also our deepest stories, preserving tales of lost worlds beneath its waves. From the sunken spires of Wise, we now sail north into a world of ice and endurance, to a colony that represents one of history's most puzzling failures. On the rugged fjords of Greenland, the Vikings, the toughest seafarers of the medieval world, established a foothold that lasted for centuries, a testament to their incredible adaptability. Yet by the 15th century, this entire society had vanished, leaving behind empty stone foundations and a mystery that has captivated historians for generations. This is the story of the lost Norse settlements of Greenland. The saga begins with a fiery-tempered outlaw named Eric the Red. After being exiled from Iceland for manslaughter around 982 AD, Eric sailed west, discovering a massive, seemingly inhospitable land. With a marketer's flair, he gave it a hopeful name, Greenland. He reasoned, as the sagas tell us, that people would be attracted to go there if it had a favorable name. The ploy worked. He returned to Iceland, gathered a fleet of settlers, and founded the eastern settlement on the island's southwest coast, followed soon after by a smaller western settlement farther north. For over 400 years, these communities not only survived, they thrived. They built stone churches like the impressive cathedral at Gardar, complete with a bell and a bishop. They established nearly 300 farms, raising cattle, sheep, and goats. They hunted walrus for their valuable ivory, which became their primary export, traded for vital goods like timber, iron, and luxury items from Europe. This was not a struggling outpost on the brink of collapse. It was a functioning medieval society on the edge of the known world. So, what could have caused such a resilient community to simply blink out of existence? The evidence points not to a single cataclysm, but to a perfect storm of pressures that slowly strangled the settlements. The most prominent villain in the story is climate change, specifically the onset of the Little Ice Age. Starting in the 13th century, the North Atlantic began to cool significantly. Winters grew longer and brutally cold, while summers became shorter and wetter. This had a devastating impact on the Norse way of life, which was fundamentally European and agrarian. Their cherished cattle, a symbol of status, required hay to survive the winter, and the shorter growing season meant less fodder could be harvested. Sea ice began to clog the shipping lanes for more of the year, isolating Greenland from vital trade contacts with Iceland and Norway. A single year of bad ice might be manageable, but decades of worsening conditions would have pushed their agricultural system to the breaking point. This environmental pressure was compounded by a critical economic collapse. The Norse economy hinged on walrus ivory. They would embark on dangerous hunting expeditions far to the north, in a region they called the Nordsetter, to acquire tusks that were highly prized in Europe for carving into religious artifacts and luxury goods. But in the 14th century, the market for walrus ivory cratered. Why? Because Europe gained access to a new, superior source, elephant ivory from Africa. Suddenly, the tough, grooved walrus tusk was no longer in high demand. The Norse of Greenland lost their main source of wealth and their ability to import essential supplies, all while their environment was becoming harsher. They were caught in a terrible squeeze. At the same time, the Norse were not alone on the island. Another culture was also navigating the changing climate, but with a technology and lifestyle far better suited to the Arctic, the Thule people, the ancestors of the modern Inuit. While the Norse struggled to keep their cattle alive, the Inuit thrived. Their culture was built around the sea. They hunted seals and whales from sleek kayaks and umiaks, used harpoons with detachable heads, and wore tailored, waterproof clothing made from animal skins. The archaeological record shows there was some contact between the two groups. Norse artifacts have been found at Inuit sites and vice versa, but the relationship was likely tense and possibly violent. The Icelandic annals record that in the late 14th century, the western settlement was attacked by Skraelings, the Norse term for the indigenous people. As resources became scarcer, conflict over hunting grounds may have become inevitable. The Norse, with their heavy iron weapons and chain mail, were formidable fighters, but they were also vastly outnumbered and trying to defend fixed farmsteads. The more mobile, adaptable Inuit may have held a decisive advantage in a prolonged struggle for survival. With all these pressures mounting, the final fate of the Greenland Norse remains shrouded in uncertainty. The last written record we have is a marriage performed in the church at Valsey in the eastern settlement in 1408. After that silence did they die out. Did they leave? One theory suggests a gradual but tragic end, malnutrition and starvation. Analysis of skeletons from the later period shows the Norse were shorter and suffered from dietary deficiencies, a sign they were not getting enough food. Another, more hopeful theory proposes a mass migration. Perhaps facing annihilation, the last Greenlanders packed their belongings onto Norse ships and sailed back to Iceland, or even attempted to join the failed Viking colony in Newfoundland, vanishing into the wider Norse diaspora. A third, darker possibility is that the final blow was not from the ice or the Inuit, but from European pirates. In the 15th century, the waters around Iceland were terrorized by English and German raiders. A single, brutal attack on an already weakened settlement could have been the final, catastrophic event. The haunting truth is that we may never know the exact combination of factors that led to their disappearance. The ruins they left behind tell a story of a people who clung to their European identity until the very end, even as the world around them transformed into a place they could no longer recognize or control. The fate of the Greenland Norse is a powerful lesson in the fragility of even the hardiest civilizations when faced with environmental shifts, economic disruption, and cultural inflexibility. They stand as a ghostly reminder that no settlement, no matter how well established, is permanent when the world itself begins to change. Yet the allure of a golden city lost in the interior proved far more powerful than any island mirage. The legend of Cibola was supercharged by a singular, dramatic event in 1536. That year, a ragged group of 4 survivors from a disastrous Spanish expedition led by Panfilo de Narvaez stumbled into a Spanish outpost in western Mexico. They had been lost for 8 years, wandering across the continent. Their leader, Alvar Núñez Cabeza de Vaca, brought with him an incredible story of survival. And when pressed by eager officials about what lay in the unexplored north, one of his companions, an enslaved Moor named Estevanico, spoke of hearing rumors from the native peoples of large, wealthy cities in that direction. The Spanish viceroy, Antonio de Mendoza, was immediately captivated. He organized a reconnaissance mission led by a friar, Marcos de Niza, with Estevanico as his guide. Estevanico, sent ahead to scout, began sending back crosses, one increasing in size with each message, a pre-arranged signal that indicated the wealth of Cibola was even greater than expected. But then, the messages stopped. Friar Marcos de Niza would later claim he approached a city on a hill so large it rivaled Tenochtitlan, seeing it from a distance before fleeing back to Mexico after learning Estevanico had been killed by the inhabitants. His report, likely heavily exaggerated to secure funding and favor, was the final piece of the puzzle. the Spanish crown now had a sworn, albeit second-hand, account of the 7 cities of gold. This was the moment that transformed myth into a full-blown, state-sponsored obsession. In 1540, Viceroy Mendoza assembled the most ambitious expedition the continent had yet seen. He placed it under the command of a young, ambitious, and well-connected conquistador, Francisco Vázquez de Coronado. This was no small scouting party. Coronado's force was a small army comprising over 300 Spanish soldiers, many on horseback, hundreds of Mexican Indian allies, and a vast herd of livestock, sheep, pigs, and cattle, meant to sustain them on a march into the unknown. They were a spectacle of European power and expectation, their armor gleaming, their hearts filled with dreams of wealth that would dwarf the treasures of the Aztecs and the Incas. Following Friar Marcos as their guide, they marched north for months, enduring harsh terrain and dwindling supplies, their anticipation growing with every mile. Finally, after an arduous journey, they reached their destination, the first of the 7 cities of Cibola. What they found was not a metropolis of gold, but the stark reality of the Zuni pueblo of Huayca. It was a multi-storied adobe complex, a formidable structure built into the landscape, but it was unmistakably a town of stone and clay, not precious metal. The Zuni, seeing an armed force approaching, prepared to defend their home. Coronado, expecting a submission, demanded entry. The response was a volley of arrows. The resulting battle was short and brutal. The Spanish cavalry and steel weapons overwhelmed the Zuni defenders, and Coronado himself was knocked unconscious by a stone. When he regained his senses and took possession of the pueblo, the crushing disappointment must have been palpable. There was no gold, there were no jewels. There was only a well-provisioned but utterly ordinary native settlement. The dream of Cibola evaporated in the dry desert air. In a letter to the viceroy, a despondent Coronado wrote, "As far as I can tell, these people worship water," a dismissive remark that spoke volumes about his cultural disdain and deep frustration. But the quest did not end at Huayca. The sheer scale of the Coronado expedition meant it could not simply turn back. Instead, the search for wealth splintered and radiated outward, reshaping the entire map of the American Southwest in the process. Coronado sent out smaller parties in all directions. One group, led by Garcia Lopez de Cardenas, became the first Europeans to lay eyes on the Grand Canyon, a geological wonder so immense they spent days trying in vain to reach its river, their scouts reporting that rocks the size of the great cathedral in Seville appeared as mere pebbles from the rim. Another group, guided by the Hopi, marched east and discovered the Acoma Pueblo, the Sky City, built high on a mesa, a place of breathtaking beauty but again no gold. The most significant side quest was led by Coronado himself, lured ever deeper into the plains by a captured Plains Indian the Spanish called El Turco, or the Turk, who spoke of a wealthy land called Quivira farther to the east. This wild goose chase led the remains of the expedition all the way into present-day Kansas, where they found only grass hut villages of the Wichita people. The Turk, whose stories had been a deliberate attempt to lead the Spanish onto the vast plains where they might get lost and perish, was eventually executed for his deception. After 2 years of fruitless searching, his men exhausted and his reputation in tatters, Coronado led a battered and broken army back to Mexico. The expedition was a catastrophic financial failure, ruining its backers and severely damaging Coronado's career. The legacy of the 7 cities of Cibola, however, is far more complex than one man's failure. While it was a devastating disappointment for the Spanish, it was a watershed moment for European knowledge of North America. The Coronado expedition and the detailed reports it generated provided the first comprehensive geographical and ethnographic record of the American Southwest and Great Plains. They documented the sophisticated cultures of the Pueblo peoples, the vast herds of buffalo on the plains, and the mind-boggling scale of the continent's interior. The legend itself did not die with Coronado's return. It simply shifted location, morphing into new myths like the lost city of Quivira or the fabled treasures of El Dorado, continuing to draw explorers deeper into the continent for centuries to come. The true gold of Cibola was not metal, but knowledge, a painfully acquired understanding of the vast, challenging, and incredibly diverse land that Spain would now struggle to conquer. The Zuni pueblos still stand today, a testament to the real, enduring civilizations that the myth of gold had blindly sought to overshadow. But while the Spanish chased cities of gold across the deserts of the New World, a far older and equally daring maritime mystery was unfolding on the opposite side of the globe, written not by conquistadors but by a civilization locked in a fierce struggle for control of the Mediterranean. Our next legend takes us back to the 6th century BC, to the powerful maritime empire of Carthage, and to an explorer whose voyage would push the boundaries of the ancient world to their very limit. This is the story of Hanno the Navigator, whose journey down the coast of Africa is a tantalizing puzzle wrapped in myth and geological wonder. The context for Hanno's expedition is crucial. Carthage, located in modern-day Tunisia, was the dominant naval and commercial power in the Western Mediterranean, a Phoenician colony that had grown rich and powerful. But they faced constant pressure from their rivals, the Greeks, who were also establishing colonies and trade routes. It was in this atmosphere of intense competition that the Carthaginian Senate commissioned one of the most ambitious exploratory missions in ancient history. Their orders to Hanno were clear and practical: sail beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we know as the Strait of Gibraltar, and establish new colonies along the Atlantic coast of Africa. This was not a journey of pure discovery. It was a strategic move to secure resources, new trade partners, and outflank their Greek competitors. Hanno set sail with a fleet of 60 ships, a staggering number for such a venture, carrying 30,000 colonists, men, women, and children, a whole segment of Carthaginian society willing to start anew on distant shores. We know about this incredible journey only because of a single, extraordinary document that survived the utter destruction of Carthage by the Romans centuries later. It is called a periplus, a sailor's logbook that lists ports, landmarks, and sailing distances. A Greek translation of Hanno's original Punic text was preserved, and it is from this fragile thread that we must reconstruct his voyage. The periplus is a dry, matter-of-fact account, which makes the incredible things it describes all the more compelling. Hanno methodically describes establishing colonies along the coast of modern-day Morocco. Then, his mission of colonization complete, he does something astonishing. Instead of turning back, he continues sailing south with a smaller contingent of ships, venturing into regions no Mediterranean sailor had ever documented. The account quickly shifts from the mundane to the fantastical. Hanno describes sailing into a large lagoon or estuary, likely the mouth of the Senegal River, where he encountered what he called Ethiopians, a term the Greeks and Carthaginians used for all dark-skinned peoples of sub-Saharan Africa. The locals could not understand the Carthaginian language, and their interpreters from earlier colonies could not translate. This moment captures the profound isolation of exploration, the point where all familiar reference points vanish. Further south, the periplus describes a night illuminated by a terrifying spectacle. The interior of the land was filled with fire, and a massive flame seemed to shoot up into the sky, reaching higher than the stars. Later, they landed on an island where a stillness was broken by the sound of distant flutes, drums, and cymbals. The crew was seized with a madness of fear, and they hastily set sail. Modern scholars believe this could describe a volcanic eruption, possibly Mount Kakuluma in Guinea, and the eerie music, perhaps the sounds of a distant tribal ceremony carried over the water, magnified by the fear and imagination of the sailors. The most famous and controversial episode comes near the journey's end. Hanno describes reaching an island with a steep mountain which he called the Chariot of the Gods. Here his crew was attacked by savage, hairy creatures that the interpreters called gorilli. The Carthaginians tried to capture them, but the creatures were incredibly agile and fierce, biting and scratching. They managed to kill 3 of the females, flaying them and bringing their skins back to Carthage. For centuries, this account was dismissed as pure folklore, a tale of mythical monsters. That was until the 19th century, when European explorers encountered the great apes of Africa and the scientific community named the gorilla, directly inspired by Hanno's ancient text. This stunning correlation forces us to take the entire periplus far more seriously. Hanno likely encountered chimpanzees or, as the name suggests, gorillas, and his description of their ferocity and appearance is remarkably accurate. So, the ultimate mystery is not what he saw, but how far south he actually sailed. The periplus gives sailing directions and the number of days traveled, but translating these ancient measurements into modern geography is notoriously difficult. The volcanic mountain, the Chariot of the Gods, is a major clue. Many historians believe it describes Mount Cameroon, a massive, active volcano that rises dramatically from the coast of West Africa. This would mean Hanno's fleet reached the Gulf of Guinea, an incredible achievement that would have taken him thousands of miles south of the Mediterranean. But a more radical theory, proposed by a few scholars, suggests he went even further. Could Hanno have rounded the southern tip of Africa and entered the Indian Ocean? The evidence for this is incredibly thin, resting on ambiguous phrases in the text and the fact that his journey simply stops without a clear turning back point. It is far more likely that his voyage ended somewhere around Cameroon, as the challenges of sailing further, with adverse currents and winds, would have been immense for his ships. The true legacy of Hanno's voyage lies in its audacity. While the Greeks were still theorizing about the shape of Africa, a Carthaginian fleet was actually sailing down its coast, documenting its wonders and perils with a startling degree of accuracy. The survival of his periplus is a minor miracle, a lone voice from a civilization that the Romans tried to erase from history. His journey represents the very peak of Carthaginian maritime power and curiosity, a fleeting glimpse of a world far larger and more diverse than anyone in the Mediterranean could have imagined. The lost expedition of Hanno the Navigator stands as a testament to the fact that even in the ancient world, the drive to explore was powerful enough to send fleets into the heart of the unknown, leaving behind a record that would puzzle and inspire the world for millennia to come. Yet the story of Hanno the Navigator, preserved on a fragile scroll, stands in stark contrast to a mystery where the written record itself becomes a central part of the puzzle. Moving from the ancient world to the dawn of the industrial age, we encounter a legend so enduring it has become the very definition of a ghost ship. This is the chilling and perplexing tale of the Mary Celeste, a story that begins not with a storm or a battle, but with an eerie and absolute silence. On the afternoon of December 4, 1872, the British merchant ship Dei Gratia was slicing through the calm Atlantic waters about 400 miles east of the Azores. The lookout spotted a 2-masted brigantine sailing erratically, yawing in the wind. As they drew closer, Captain David Morehouse of the Dei Gratia, a man familiar with the vessels that plied these trade routes, recognized the ship. It was the Mary Celeste, which had left New York for Genoa, Italy, 8 days before his own departure. He signaled her but received no response. A growing sense of unease prompted him to send a boarding party over to the silent vessel. What they discovered aboard the Mary Celeste would become the cornerstone of one of history's greatest maritime riddles. The ship was, by all accounts, perfectly seaworthy. It was not taking on water, the hull was sound. The cargo, 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol, was largely intact and securely stowed. There was a 6-month supply of food and fresh water in the stores. The personal belongings of the crew and the captain's family were untouched, with valuables like jewelry and money still in the captain's quarters. Yet the 10 people who had been on board were gone. The last entry in the ship's log was dated 10 days earlier on November 24th and placed the Mary Celeste within sight of the Azores island of Santa Maria. It noted nothing amiss, but the scene suggested a sudden, panicked departure. One of the ship's pumps was disassembled as if being repaired. The chronometer and sextant were missing. The ship's single lifeboat was gone. A rope, frayed at the end, was trailing behind the vessel, tied to the ship. And most ominously, when tested, there was about 3.5 feet of water in the bilge, not enough to sink the ship, but certainly a cause for concern. The captain of the day, Gracia, sailed the Mary Celeste to Gibraltar, where a lengthy and sensational court of inquiry was held, hoping to unravel what had happened to Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife, their 2-year-old daughter, and the 7 experienced crewmen. The official inquiry, faced with a complete lack of witnesses, immediately suspected foul play. The most obvious theory was mutiny or piracy. Perhaps the crew had murdered the captain and his family and then escaped in the lifeboat. Yet this theory crumbled under scrutiny. There was no evidence of a struggle, no bloodstains, no signs of violence anywhere on the ship. The cargo of alcohol, a valuable commodity, was untouched, which made no sense for pirates. Another theory pointed to a natural disaster, specifically an underwater earthquake known as a seaquake. Such an event could have created a powerful shockwave, terrifying the crew into believing the ship was about to break apart. They might have abandoned ship in a panic, only for the Mary Celeste to remain mysteriously afloat. This could explain the disassembled pump and the water in the bilge, as the quake might have sprung a minor leak. However, the Dei Gracia, sailing a similar route just days behind, reported no such seismic activity. The most scientifically compelling explanation revolves around the ship's volatile cargo. Those 1,701 barrels of industrial alcohol were made from fermented molasses. As they warmed in the hold, they could have produced vast amounts of flammable vapor. The theory suggests that on the morning of November 25th, Captain Briggs might have ordered the main hatch covers to be removed to ventilate the hold, fearing an explosion. Perhaps at that very moment, a buildup of pressure blew the caps off the barrels with a roar that sounded like an imminent blast. Believing the ship was seconds from exploding, the crew and family, in a desperate, collective panic, evacuated into the lifeboat. They would have tied it to the ship with a strong rope, that frayed rope found trailing behind, to stay close, intending to board again once the danger passed. But then, a sudden squall or a gust of wind caught the sails of the Mary Celeste. The ship, now lighter without its passengers, surged forward, snapping the tow rope. The people in the overloaded lifeboat would have been left drifting in the vast ocean, watching helplessly as their only real chance of survival sailed away without them. The Mary Celeste, now a ghost ship, would have continued on its lonely course, its crew condemned to die of thirst and exposure in the open boat. Despite the logic of the alcohol vapor theory, the mystery endures because it can never be definitively proven. The story was sensationalized by a young writer named Arthur Conan Doyle years before he created Sherlock Holmes, who published a fictionalized account filled with supernatural elements, cementing the ship's ghostly reputation in the public mind. The Mary Celeste itself seemed cursed. It passed through numerous owners after the incident, never turning a profit, and was finally deliberately wrecked on a Haitian reef in 1885 as part of an insurance fraud scheme. The legend of the Mary Celeste persists because it is a perfect, terrifying blank canvas. It represents our deep-seated fear of the unknown, the idea that a routine journey can be interrupted by a chain of ordinary events that lead to an extraordinary and inexplicable tragedy. It is the archetypal ghost ship not because it is haunted by spirits, but because it is haunted by the absence of answers, a silent monument to the countless souls the sea has taken without leaving a single clue behind. But while the Atlantic has its Atlantis and the icy north its lost Viking colonies, the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean has spawned its own legendary sunken continent, a tale born from a unique blend of Victorian obsession, questionable scholarship, and a deep desire to find a single source for all the world's ancient wisdom. This is the story of the lost continent of Mu, a legend that began not with an ancient map, but in the mind of an eccentric and determined 19th-century antiquarian named Augustus Le Plongeon. Le Plongeon was a fascinating character, a British-American photographer, amateur archaeologist, and self-proclaimed expert on the Maya. He and his wife, Alice, were among the first to seriously photograph and explore the ruins of Chichén Itzá and Uxmal in Mexico. But where other scholars saw a complex indigenous civilization, Le Plongeon saw something else entirely. He became convinced that the ancient Maya were the founders of all-world civilization, and that their knowledge had originated from an even older and far more advanced source. He claimed to have uncovered this truth by deciphering ancient Mayan texts, specifically a set of mysterious artifacts he called the Nokal tablets. According to Le Plongeon, these tablets told the story of a great continent that once existed in the Pacific Ocean, a land he named Mu, using a term he believed he had found in Mayan inscriptions. He proposed that this continent was the original cradle of humankind, a utopian society that met a catastrophic end, sinking beneath the waves in a single day and night of geological upheaval, much like its Atlantic counterpart Atlantis. The survivors of Mu, he argued, then traveled east, bringing their advanced knowledge to the Americas and founding the Mayan civilization, and west to seed the cultures of ancient Egypt and India. There is, however, a profound problem with this foundational claim. No other archaeologist of Le Plongeon's time or since has ever seen these so-called Nokal tablets. Mainstream Mayan scholars completely reject his translations, demonstrating that he fundamentally misunderstood Mayan glyphs and projected his own elaborate theories onto a writing system that was then largely undeciphered. His work was dismissed as pseudoscience, a wild fantasy built on a complete misinterpretation of the actual evidence. But the idea of Mu was too tantalizing to die with Le Plongeon's academic rejection. It found its most influential champion in a retired British colonial official and prolific writer named James Churchward. In the 1920s and 30s, Churchward published a series of best-selling books such as The Lost Continent of Mu, that took Le Plongeon's seed of an idea and grew it into a sprawling, intricate mythology. Churchward claimed that while serving in India, he had been rescued from a fever by a high priest who then revealed to him a set of ancient, secret tablets written in the original language of mankind, the language of Mu. These Nokal tablets, which Churchward said were 12,000 years old, were his supposed source. His descriptions of Mu were vividly detailed. He depicted it as a vast, idyllic continent stretching from north of Hawaii to the Fiji Islands and Easter Island. It was home to 64 million people, the Nokals, or children of Mu, who lived in a sophisticated, peaceful society without war or money. They possessed advanced technology and spiritual wisdom. According to Churchward, this paradise was utterly destroyed around 12,000 years ago when massive underground gas chambers collapsed, causing the entire continent to sink into the ocean in a cataclysm of fire and water, creating the thousands of islands we see in the Pacific today. The scientific case against the existence of Mu, however, is overwhelming and rests on the fundamental principles of geology. The theory of plate tectonics, which is as foundational to modern geology as evolution is to biology, provides a clear and compelling explanation for the formation of the Pacific Ocean's features. The Pacific Basin is not the scar of a sunken continent. It is a vast tectonic plate, one of the largest on Earth. The islands of the Pacific, from Hawaii to Tahiti, are not the mountaintops of a drowned landmass. They are volcanic hotspots where molten rock from deep within the Earth's mantle has risen up and built enormous undersea mountains that have broken the surface. The geology is clear. These islands were born from the seafloor. They were never part of a larger continent. Furthermore, the sheer depth of the Pacific Basin makes the idea impossible. The ocean floor in these regions is thousands of meters deep. For a continent to have sunk there, we would find unmistakable evidence: vast submerged plateaus with continental rock, known as continental crust, which is fundamentally different from the dense basaltic rock of the ocean floor. No such evidence exists. The entire concept of a rapidly sinking continent violates everything we know about the slow, gradual movement of tectonic plates, which shift at a speed comparable to the growth of a human fingernail. So why, in the face of such definitive scientific refutation, does the legend of Mu persist with such tenacity in alternative history circles? The answer lies in the powerful human desire for a simplified, romanticized past. The idea of Mu, like that of Atlantis, serves as a convenient mother culture or single source for the similar architectural and artistic styles found in disparate ancient societies, from the pyramids of Egypt and Mesoamerica to the megalithic statues of Easter Island. Instead of accepting the more complex and scientifically supported reality of independent invention and cultural diffusion across land bridges, the lost continent provides an appealingly simple explanation. It suggests a golden age of global unity and advanced knowledge, a narrative that resonates deeply with those who feel modern science is too rigid or that humanity has lost a primordial wisdom. Mu becomes a blank slate onto which any theory about ancient astronauts, psychic powers, or advanced technology can be projected. The very lack of physical evidence is, paradoxically, used to support the idea, with proponents arguing that the evidence must lie buried under miles of ocean sediment or has been suppressed by a closed-minded academic establishment. The enduring appeal of Mu is a testament not to its historical reality, but to the enduring power of a good story, a story of a perfect world, lost to time, waiting just beyond the edge of our maps and our understanding. From the sprawling Pacific myth of Mu, we now journey to a tale rooted in the very concrete and ruthless ambition of one of history's most formidable emperors. Our next legend takes us to China in the 3rd century BC, to the court of Qin Shi Huang, the man who first unified China and became its first emperor. His was a reign defined by monumental achievements, the standardization of writing, currency, and laws, and the beginning of the Great Wall. But it was also defined by a consuming, all-too-human fear, the terror of his own mortality. It is from this potent mixture of absolute power and profound vulnerability that the extraordinary story of the explorer Zhu Fu emerges. The historical record, primarily from the great historian Sima Qian's Records of the Grand Historian, sets the scene with chilling clarity. The emperor, having conquered all he could see, became obsessed with conquering death itself. He surrounded himself with fangxi, or court magicians, who promised they could put him in contact with immortal beings or find the secret to everlasting life. The most prominent of these figures was Zhu Fu. In 219 BC, Zhu Fu presented a bold proposal to the emperor. He claimed that far out in the Eastern Sea, beyond the reach of mortal men, lay 3 mystical islands: Pinglai, Fangzhang, and Yingzhou. These were the abodes of the Xian, the immortal sages who possessed the elixir of life. Zhu Fu requested a fleet, a crew, and a specific cargo to succeed in this divine quest. The emperor, desperate for any hope, agreed without hesitation. The scale of the expedition Zhu Fu commanded is staggering to contemplate. He was given a fleet of ships. Some accounts say 60, others are more vague but suggest a substantial armada. His crew numbered in the thousands, including skilled sailors, soldiers, and most intriguingly, a group of 3,000 virgin boys and girls. The inclusion of children is a critical detail. In the mystical beliefs of the time, it was thought that purity was necessary to approach the immortals. But from a practical standpoint, it also suggests that Zhu Fu was planning for more than a quick round trip. He also took aboard vast quantities of seeds for the 5 primary grains, along with craftsmen of every trade from farmers to carpenters to metalworkers. This was not a simple diplomatic mission, it was the seeding of a colony. Zhu Fu set sail and was gone for years. When he finally returned, empty-handed, he faced the increasingly impatient and paranoid emperor with a clever excuse. He reported that he had indeed seen the mystical Pinglai mountain, but a mighty sea dragon guarded the approach, preventing his ships from landing. He requested a company of expert archers to slay the beast on a second voyage. Once again, the emperor granted his wish, supplying him with an even greater fleet. Zhu Fu sailed east a second time and, according to Chinese history, vanished forever. This is where history ends and legend truly begins. The most persistent and compelling theory is that Zhu Fu and his massive expedition did not vanish into the ocean, but actually landed in the Japanese archipelago. The timeline is strikingly coincidental. Zhu Fu's disappearance around 210 BC aligns almost perfectly with the beginning of Japan's Yayoi period, a transformative era marked by the introduction of wet rice agriculture, bronze and iron metalworking, and new weaving techniques. Before the Yayoi, the indigenous Jomon people were primarily a hunter-gatherer society with a simpler material culture. The sudden, rapid advancement during the Yayoi period has long puzzled archaeologists. Could the arrival of a large, technologically advanced group from the Chinese mainland, complete with farmers, seeds, and metalworkers, have been the catalyst for this profound societal shift? Proponents of this theory point to the specific skills Zhu Fu carried. The 5 grains would have included rice, and the craftsmen would have possessed the very knowledge that defined the Yayoi revolution. The evidence for this connection is not just circumstantial, it is etched into the landscape and culture of Japan itself. All across the country, but particularly in coastal areas like Kumano and Shingu, you can find shrines, tombs, and monuments dedicated to Zhu Fu, who is known in Japanese as Jafuku. These are not recent tourist attractions, they are sites of veneration that have existed for centuries. In Shingu, there is a sacred tomb believed to be his final resting place, and a nearby shrine where he is worshipped as a god of medicine and knowledge, a clear link to his original quest for the elixir of life. Local legends in these areas speak of a wise man from across the sea who taught the people advanced farming techniques, new methods of well digging, and the use of medicinal herbs. The story of Zhu Fu is so deeply woven into the local folklore of these regions that it strongly suggests a folk memory of a significant arrival from the mainland. However, the theory is not without its staunch critics. Many mainstream historians and archaeologists argue that the cultural and technological changes of the Yayoi period were the result of gradual, sustained contact and migration from the Korean peninsula, not a single dramatic arrival led by a Chinese sorcerer. They point out that there is no definitive archaeological evidence, such as a shipwreck or artifacts that can be irrefutably linked to Zhu Fu's fleet, to prove the connection. The monuments in Japan, they suggest, could be later inventions, a way for communities to create a prestigious founding myth by linking themselves to the great Chinese civilization. The story, for these skeptics, remains in the realm of compelling folklore rather than proven history. Yet, the legend of Zhu Fu is too powerful to be confined to a single shore. Some more speculative theories have taken his voyage even further, proposing that his fleet, perhaps driven off course by storms, could have crossed the Pacific and reached the Americas long before any European explorer. While this idea is firmly in the territory of fringe history, lacking any credible evidence, it speaks to the magnetic pull of the Zhu Fu story. It is a narrative that beautifully encapsulates the driving forces of exploration, the quest for knowledge, the flight from tyranny, and the hope for a new beginning. Whether Zhu Fu was a cunning trickster who engineered the greatest escape plan in history, a failed magician lost at sea, or the cultural father of a new age in Japan, his story endures. It is a testament to one man's audacious gamble to sail beyond the reach of an emperor's power, transforming from a seeker of immortality into an immortal legend himself. But if the story of Xu Fu is one of escape and a new beginning, our next legend presents a voyage of a different kind, not away from the world but towards a final mystical rest. We delve now into the misty realm of British mythology, to the very heart of the Arthurian cycle, and to the journey that promises not death but a mysterious healing and a future return. This is the enduring tale of the lost island of Avalon and the final voyage of King Arthur, the legend, as crystallized by writers like Geoffrey of Monmouth and Sir Thomas Malory, is both tragic and hopeful. It tells of the Battle of Camlan, the final, devastating conflict between King Arthur and his treacherous nephew Mordred. It is a battle that decimates the flower of Arthur's chivalry, the Knights of the Round Table. Arthur himself receives a mortal wound run through by Mordred even as he strikes down his foe. With the dream of Camelot shattered, the king's fate is placed in the hands of a few loyal companions. The story then takes a turn from the historical to the deeply mystical. Arthur is not buried in a common grave. Instead, he is placed on a funeral barge accompanied by a group of mysterious, sorrowful queens. This somber vessel then sails away from the shores of Britain, not to another kingdom, but to the mystical Isle of Avalon. The promise is that Arthur's wounds will be healed in this enchanted place, and that he will return one day in his nation's greatest hour of need, the prophecy of the once and future king. The voyage itself is the crucial transition, moving Arthur from a fallen mortal king to an eternal, sleeping legend. To understand Avalon, we must look beyond the medieval romances and into its ancient Celtic origins. The name itself provides the first clue. Avalon is derived from the Old Welsh word afal, meaning apple. It was known as Unis Afalon, the Isle of Apples. In Celtic mythology, apples were powerfully symbolic fruit, associated with immortality, healing, and the otherworld. The Irish otherworld, Tir na an Og, was often described as a land of everlasting youth and abundance, where magical apple trees bore fruit that granted eternal life. The Greek Hesperides, with its golden apples guarded by a dragon, shares a similar theme. Avalon, therefore, was not conceived as a physical place one could simply chart on a map. It was an island outside of normal time and space, a realm of eternal summer and magical restoration, accessible only to those who knew the secret pathways across the water or who were guided by its otherworldly guardians, like the enchantress Morgan Le Fay, who is often named as one of the queens who escort Arthur. This mythological concept, however, became powerfully anchored to a very real and striking location in Somerset, England, Glastonbury Tor. The Tor is a dramatic, conical hill that rises abruptly from the flatness of the surrounding Somerset levels. In ancient times, before the marshes were drained, this area was often flooded, with the Tor appearing as a true island surrounded by water and mist. This topography made it a natural candidate for a place of legend. The connection was cemented in the 12th century by the monks of Glastonbury Abbey, who made a stunning announcement. They claim to have discovered, deep in their cemetery, a hollowed-out oak log containing the skeletons of a large man and a woman, along with a lead cross bearing the inscription, "Here lies buried the renowned King Arthur with Guinevere, his second wife, in the Isle of Avalon." For the abbey, which had recently suffered a devastating fire, this discovery was a financial and spiritual boon, attracting pilgrims and wealth from across the land. It served to Christianize the pagan myth, turning Avalon from a magical isle into a monastic sanctuary. The modern interpretation of Avalon bridges these two ideas, the mythological and the geographical. Many see Glastonbury Tor as a physical manifestation of the spiritual concept of Avalon. The Tor has been a site of spiritual significance for thousands of years, with archaeological evidence of Neolithic and Iron Age settlement, suggesting it was always considered a sacred, liminal space, a point where our world touches another. The journey to Avalon, then, can be seen as a metaphor for the soul's final passage, a healing transition from the trauma of earthly life to a state of peace and potential rebirth. Arthur's voyage is not merely a trip across a lake. It is a crossing into the collective unconscious, a symbol of hope that even the greatest leaders and ideals are not truly gone, but merely awaiting the call to awaken. The legend of Avalon endures because it fulfills a profound human need, the belief that what is lost can be found again, and that even in the face of utter defeat, there exists a place of healing beyond the horizon, a sanctuary in the midst of time. Moving from the grand mythological voyages of ancient kings, we arrive at a mystery that is chillingly modern, starkly real, and set against one of the most unforgiving landscapes imaginable. The year is 1900, and the stage is a tiny, barren cluster of rocks known as the Flannan Isles, or the Seven Hunters, rising from the brutal North Atlantic about 20 miles west of Scotland's Outer Hebrides. On the largest of these rocks, Lyonesse, stood a relatively new lighthouse, a 75-foot tower of stone, a beacon of human defiance against the raw power of the sea. In December of that year, this symbol of order and safety became the center of a real-life ghost story, so perplexing it has haunted the public imagination for over a century, the complete and utter disappearance of its three keepers. The first unsettling sign came on December 15th. The steamer Arctur, en route from Philadelphia to the Scottish port of Leith, passed by the Flannan Isles and noted that the lighthouse lamp was dark. This was highly unusual. The light was a critical navigational aid, and its keepers were known for their reliability. However, due to rough weather, a scheduled relief mission from the lighthouse tender Hesperus was delayed. It wasn't until noon on December 26 that the Hesperus, carrying replacement keeper Joseph Moore, was finally able to approach the island. Even from a distance, something felt wrong. No flag was flying from the flagpole to signal their arrival, and no one came out to welcome them. Captain Jim Harvey ordered a series of distress signals to be sounded, but only the echo from the cliffs answered back. A deeply uneasy Joseph Moore was rowed to the small landing dock, set into a steep 100-foot-high cliff face accessible only by a steep railway incline known as the Crane Tramway. What Moore discovered as he climbed the path to the lighthouse has become the stuff of legend. The main gate and the door to the lighthouse itself were both locked. Forcing his way inside, he found an eerie scene of abandoned normality. The clock on the wall had stopped. The fire in the kitchen grate had long since gone out. The table in the keeper's quarters was set for a meal that was never eaten, but there was no sign of a struggle, no indication of violence or disorder. The three men, Thomas Marshall, James Jucat, and the occasional keeper, Donald MacArthur, were simply gone. Moore rushed back to the landing and signaled to the Hesperus, "The three keepers have disappeared." A thorough search of the entire small island revealed nothing. The men had vanished without a trace. The only potential clues were found in the lighthouse's official logbook, and its final entries were deeply strange. The last normal entry was made on the morning of December 15th, noting the weather conditions, but an entry attributed to Thomas Marshall for December 12th described severe storms, writing that the wind was so powerful the other two keepers had been praying. This was bizarre because the weather logs from nearby coastal stations reported calm seas on that date. The final and most haunting entry was brief: "Storm ended, sea calm." God is over all. This was the last thing ever written in the log. The subsequent pages were blank. The official investigation by the Northern Lighthouse Board concluded that the men had likely been swept away by a freak wave while attending to equipment near the cliff edge. But the locked doors, the set table, and the puzzling log entries have fueled endless speculation, transforming a tragic accident into one of the great unsolved mysteries of the sea. Theories attempting to explain the disappearance range from the plausible to the truly outlandish. The giant wave theory is the most accepted. The landing dock and tramway were situated in a natural chute where storm surges could funnel water with immense force. It is entirely possible that a rogue wave, An enormous, spontaneous wall of water far larger than the surrounding seas surged up the channel and swept all three men away in an instant, even if the weather at the lighthouse itself seemed calm. This could explain why they were outside together, perhaps securing a storage box or checking the crane. Yet, skeptics question why all three experienced keepers who knew the dangers intimately would have been in such a hazardous spot at the same time, especially leaving the lighthouse doors locked behind them. Other theories delve into human drama. Was there a fight? Donald MacArthur had a reputation for a volatile temper. Could an argument have escalated into violence, with a survivor then concocting a cover-up and escaping on a passing ship? This seems far-fetched given the isolation of the island and the fact that no boat was missing. A more exotic theory involved foreign spies or abduction. At the height of British naval power, could the keepers have witnessed something they shouldn't have? A secret submarine landing, for instance, and been silenced? There is, needless to say, not a shred of evidence for this. And then, of course, there are the supernatural explanations. The Flannan Isles have long been considered a place of ancient spirits in local folklore. Some whispered that the island itself had taken the men, or that they had been victims of a malevolent force. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Flannan Isles mystery is not the solution, but the profound sense of isolation and vulnerability it captures. The story forces us to imagine the psychological state of three men living for weeks at a time in that stone tower, surrounded by the endless, raging sea. The logbook entries, whether accurate or not, hint at the strain. The act of recording that God is over all feels less like a statement of faith and more like a desperate plea for comfort in the face of overwhelming natural forces. Their disappearance is a stark reminder that even at the dawn of the 20th century, with all its technological progress, the sea remained an unconquered frontier, capable of erasing human lives without leaving a single, comprehensible clue. The locked door, the set table, and the stopped clock on Eilean Moor are a frozen moment in time, a silent testament to three men who simply stepped out of their door and into the realm of everlasting mystery. Of all the phantoms that haunt the world's sea lanes, none is more famous or more terrifying than the one we turn to now. This is not a lost explorer or a sunken kingdom, but a cursed vessel itself, a spectral ship condemned to an eternity of endless wandering. No list of maritime mysteries would be complete without the spine-chilling legend of the Flying Dutchman, the ghost ship doomed to sail the oceans forever, a permanent warning etched against the horizon. The most enduring version of the story takes us to the tumultuous waters off the southern tip of Africa in the 17th century. A Dutch East India Company captain named Hendrik van der Decken is commanding his ship, the Flyende Hollander, on the long, lucrative and perilous journey back from the Spice Islands. His path home requires rounding the Cape of Good Hope, a place known to sailors not as a Cape of Good Hope, but as the Cape of Storms. Here, the Atlantic and Indian Oceans collide in a maelstrom of wind and water where waves can reach the size of mountains. As van der Decken attempts to round the cape, a hurricane-force storm descends, threatening to dash his ship against the jagged rocks. His crew, terrified, begs him to turn back. But the captain is a man of immense pride and stubborn will. Enraged by the defiance of the elements and the fear of his men, he is said to have flown into a blasphemous fury. He swore an oath that he would round the cape, even if it took him until the day of judgment. Some versions say he challenged God himself, while others claim he swore a pact with the devil. In that moment of ultimate hubris, a spectral figure appeared on the deck, and a voice boomed from the heavens pronouncing his sentence. Since you are so determined, you shall sail on until the end of time. From that moment, the Flying Dutchman and its crew were cursed, never to make port, forever battling the very storm they sought to conquer. This core legend, however, is just one thread in a much richer tapestry. The idea of a ghost ship is an archetype that appears in the folklore of many seafaring nations, a natural product of the fear and loneliness of long voyages. But the Flying Dutchman as we know it was crystallized in the 19th century, largely through two powerful works of art. The first was a widely read Gothic novel published in 1821, and the second and most influential was Richard Wagner's thrilling opera Der Fliegende Holländer, which premiered in 1843. Wagner took the raw folk tale and infused it with a profound romantic tragedy. In his version, the Dutchman's curse can only be broken once every 7 years when he is allowed to come ashore. If during that brief respite he can find a woman who will love him faithfully until death, the curse will be lifted. This added a heartbreaking layer of pathos to the story, transforming the captain from a simple blasphemer into a tragic figure yearning for redemption. The opera's haunting overture, with its musical depiction of howling winds and crashing waves, cemented the legend's dramatic power in the public imagination, ensuring its passage from sailor's yarn to high art. The legend's grip on our psyche is so strong that it has spawned countless alleged sightings, often reported by the most credible of witnesses. Perhaps the most famous account comes from none other than the future King George V of England. In 1881, while serving as a 16-year-old naval cadet aboard HMS Bacchante, he and 13 other crew members logged a sighting off the coast of Australia. Their entry describes a strange, red-hulled ship glowing with an unearthly light, sailing against the wind before vanishing into thin air. The log chillingly notes that the sailor who first spotted the phantom from the crow's nest later fell to his death from the mast, a misfortune seen by the superstitious crew as confirmation of the sighting's cursed nature. Similar reports have persisted into the modern era, with sailors in both world wars claiming to have seen the apparition. Psychologists and maritime historians offer rational explanations for these sightings, pointing to optical illusions like the Fata Morgana mirage, which can distort and elevate distant ships on the horizon, making them appear to float eerily in the sky. Sleep deprivation, isolation, and the stress of long sea voyages could also contribute to collective hallucinations. Yet, the persistence of these reports speaks to the legend's power. We see what we fear, and we fear what we cannot understand. Beyond the ghost story, the Flying Dutchman serves as a powerful and timeless symbol. It is the ultimate cautionary tale about the sin of hubris, the dangerous belief that humanity can conquer nature through sheer force of will. Captain Vander Decken's oath is an act of defiance against the natural order, and his eternal punishment is a reminder that the sea, for all our technology, remains an unforgiving master. The ship also embodies the profound loneliness and existential dread of the sailor's life, the fear of never returning home, of being trapped in an endless cycle of journeying. In this sense, the Dutchman is every sailor who never made it back, their spirits forever adrift. Its continued presence in popular culture, from the Pirates of the Caribbean films to episodes of SpongeBob SquarePants, proves its adaptability. It is a story that can be framed as horror, tragedy, or adventure, but its core remains the same, a warning whispered on the wind, a flickering light on the water, reminding us that some boundaries are not meant to be crossed. But if the legend of the Flying Dutchman represents an eternal punishment upon the sea, our next mystery offers a different kind of eternal quest, a search not for a ghost, but for a city of almost unimaginable wealth, a place whose very name became synonymous with the pinnacle of ancient maritime commerce. We now turn from the spectral to the spectacular, journeying back to the world of the Hebrew Bible and the legendary riches of King Solomon. This is the enduring enigma of the lost city of Tarshish. The name Tarshish appears throughout the Old Testament, and it is always associated with almost mythical prosperity and nautical might. The books of Kings and Chronicles describe how King Solomon, in partnership with the Phoenician King Hiram of Tyre, built a fleet of ships of Tarshish at the port of Ezion-Geber on the Red Sea. These vessels undertook voyages lasting 3 years, returning with cargoes that stagger the imagination: gold, silver, ivory, precious stones, and exotic animals like apes and peacocks. The prophet Ezekiel, in his lament for the city of Tyre, provides an even more detailed inventory of Tarshish's trade, listing silver, iron, tin, lead, bronze, slaves, and every kind of precious object. The phrase "ship of Tarshish" even evolved into a generic term in Hebrew for a large, ocean-going vessel, a testament to the fame of its maritime technology. But for all its biblical prominence, the actual location of Tarshish is never explicitly stated, transforming it from a historical trading partner into one of antiquity's most sought-after prizes. The most compelling and long-standing candidate lies in the mineral-rich region of Andalusia in southern Spain. Here, near the mouth of the Guadalquivir River, flourished a civilization known to the Greeks as Tartessos. The classical historian Herodotus describes Tartessos as a land of incredible wealth beyond the Pillars of Hercules, the Strait of Gibraltar. The Tartessians were renowned for their control over vast deposits of silver, tin, and other metals which were highly prized throughout the Mediterranean. This aligns perfectly with the biblical description of Tarshish as a source of these exact materials. Furthermore, the linguistic connection is tantalizing. Tarshish in Hebrew could mean smelting plant or refinery, a fitting name for a place known for its metalworking. The geographical logic is also powerful. For Phoenician sailors, Tartessos represented the far western edge of the known world, a distant and wealthy terminus for their trade routes. It is entirely plausible that the biblical writers, drawing on Phoenician sources, would have used this fabled western land as the archetype of distant, opulent trade. Yet the Spanish theory is not without its complications. The biblical account of Solomon's fleet sailing from the Red Sea presents a significant geographical puzzle. A voyage from the Red Sea to Spain would require sailing down the coast of Africa, around the Cape of Good Hope, and back up the Atlantic, a journey of immense difficulty that many scholars argue was far beyond the capabilities of 10th century BC navigation. This has led to the proposal of a second major candidate, the great North African port city of Carthage. Founded by Phoenician colonists from Tyre, Carthage became the dominant naval power in the western Mediterranean. Its Punic name might have been something similar to Tarshish, and it certainly controlled trade in the very commodities listed in the Bible. If Solomon's ships of Tarshish were simply a type of ship, a Tarshish-class vessel, they could have been sailing to a Phoenician colony like Carthage, a much more plausible destination from a Red Sea port than Spain. In this interpretation, Tarshish is not a specific city, but a term for the far western Phoenician trading network with Carthage as its central hub. But the mystery deepens further when we consider even more radical theories. Some historians, noting the 3-year duration of the voyages, have suggested Tarshish could have been located much farther east, perhaps on the coast of India. This would align with the mention of apes and peacocks, animals indigenous to the Indian subcontinent. The ancient Tamil Kingdom of India had a thriving maritime trade, and its name could potentially have been rendered as Tarshish in Hebrew. Another fringe theory, popular in certain British historical circles, places Tarshish in Cornwall, England. This argument points to the ancient and extensive tin trade from the British Isles, a vital resource for making bronze. Could Phoenician traders have voyaged all the way to Britain for this precious metal? And could the legends of that distant, metal-rich land have filtered back to the Levant as the fabulous Tarshish? While intriguing, the evidence for this is far more circumstantial than for the Mediterranean candidates. The frustrating reality is that the city of Tartessos in Spain itself vanished from history around the 6th century BC, possibly due to the rising power of Carthage or environmental changes that silted up its harbors. This means that even if Tartessos and Tarshish are one and the same, we are searching for a city that was already a ghost to later classical historians. Modern archaeology has yet to pinpoint its exact location, though tantalizing finds in the Huelva region of Spain, including Phoenician artifacts and evidence of extensive metalworking, keep the hope alive. The true identity of Tarshish may forever remain just out of reach, a testament to the vast and interconnected world of ancient trade. Its legacy is not a pinpoint on a map, but a powerful idea, the dream of a destination so wealthy, so far away, that its very name became a byword for the ultimate reward of a long and perilous journey across the sea. While the sagas are filled with the deeds of great Viking warriors and chieftains, sometimes the most extraordinary stories belong to those who are not seeking fame or fortune, but simply a place to call home. Our next legend shifts the focus from kings and fleets to a woman whose life reads like an epic poem in its own right. We journey now to the wind-whipped shores of Iceland at the turn of the first millennium, to meet Gudrid Thorbjarnardóttir, a figure who stands as one of the most well-traveled individuals of the entire Middle Ages, a true pioneer whose journey spanned the known world and ventured far beyond it. Her story is preserved for us in two great Icelandic texts, the Saga of the Greenlanders and the Saga of Eric the Red. While these accounts were written down centuries after the events they describe, blending history with oral tradition, the outline of Gudrid's life is remarkably consistent and breathtaking in its scope. She was born around 980 AD in the Snæfellsnes Peninsula of Iceland, a dramatic landscape of volcanoes and glaciers that seems to breed resilience. Her story begins with tragedy and movement. After her father refuses a marriage proposal for her from a suitor he deems unworthy, the family is forced to flee Iceland to avoid a blood feud, joining the wave of emigration to the new settlements in Greenland led by Eric the Red. This first voyage, a perilous crossing of the North Atlantic in an open longship, was just the beginning of her odyssey. Gudrid's life in Greenland was marked by further hardship and loss. Her first husband, Thorir, died in a winter of famine, leaving her a widow. She then married Thorstein Eriksson, the brother of the famous explorer Leif Erikson. It was through this marriage that Gudrid was drawn into the most famous Viking venture of all, the voyage to Vinland. According to the sagas, she accompanied her husband on an attempt to reach the new lands Leif had discovered to the west. Their expedition was plagued by misfortune. They spent a summer lost at sea, battered by storms, and eventually returned to Greenland without ever setting foot on the North American coast, with Thorstein dying of an illness shortly after. For a second time, Gudrid was a widow, yet instead of retreating from a life of danger, she embraced it even more fully. Her resilience caught the eye of another explorer, a wealthy Icelandic merchant named Thorfinn Karlsefni. They married, and together they organized the largest and most ambitious expedition to Vinland ever attempted. This is the voyage that cements Gudrid's place in history. Around the year 1010 AD, she sailed with Thorfinn and a company of over 60 men, 5 women, and an assortment of livestock. Their goal was not just exploration, but permanent colonization. They successfully reached the shores of North America, a place they called Vinland for the wild grapes they found growing there, likely settling in what is now Elance Ox Meadows in Newfoundland. It was here, in that rough-hewn timber camp on the edge of an unknown continent, that Gudrid achieved a profound milestone. She gave birth to a son, Snorri Thorfinnsson, who holds the distinction of being the first child of European descent known to have been born in the Americas, a full 500 years before the voyages of Columbus. The sagas describe this moment not with grand fanfare, but with a quiet humanity, highlighting Gudrid's strength and the hope this new life represented for the entire colony. The Norse settlement in Vinland was short-lived, lasting perhaps only a few years before conflicts with the indigenous peoples they called Skrælings made it untenable. Gudrid, Thorfinn, and young Snorri returned to Iceland, where Thorfinn's family owned a prosperous farm called Glomber. But Gudrid's story of exploration was still not over. After Thorfinn died of old age, and with Snorri grown, this remarkable woman, now in her middle age, embarked on one final, incredible journey. The sagas tell us that she undertook a pilgrimage on foot all the way to Rome. Imagine the scale of this undertaking. A woman from the far northern edge of the world who had already crossed the Atlantic Ocean, now walking thousands of miles through foreign lands to reach the heart of Christendom. Upon her return to Iceland, she became a nun, living out her days as a respected matriarch, a living repository of the most incredible experiences of her age. Separating the historical Gudrid from the legendary figure in the sagas is a complex task for modern scholars. The archaeological discovery of the Norse settlement at Elands Oaks Meadows in the 1960s proved that the Vinland voyages were real, lending immense credibility to the core of her story. The birth of her son Snorri is a specific personal detail that feels less like a mythic invention and more like a cherished family memory. Her pilgrimage to Rome, while not corroborated by external records, is entirely plausible given the deep piety of later medieval Iceland and the known trade routes that connected the North Atlantic to mainland Europe. Gudrid Thorbjarnardóttir represents a different kind of explorer. She was not a conqueror or a treasure seeker, but a settler, a mother, and a pilgrim. Her legacy is not one of conquest, but of connection, a life that physically and spiritually linked the remote Viking outposts of the North Atlantic with the forests of the New World and the holy city of Rome, making her one of the most significant and inspiring figures from the age of the Vikings. But even the enduring mystery of the Flying Dutchman is a legend born from centuries of storytelling, whereas our next case is a chillingly modern disappearance. An event recorded with all the precision of the early 20th century that somehow remains just as inexplicable as any ancient myth. We travel now to the summer of 1909, to the bustling maritime world of the British Empire, where a grand new steamship named the SS Waratah embarked on what should have been a routine coastal voyage. It would instead become a voyage into absolute nothingness, earning the vessel its grim nickname, Australia's Titanic. The Waratah was the very emblem of modern confidence. Built for the Blue Anchor Line, she was a 500-foot-long, 9,300-ton passenger and cargo liner, designed specifically for the lucrative route between Britain and Australia via the South African coast. Her owners boasted of her comfort and safety, promoting her as one of the most advanced ships of her time, equipped with a newfangled anti-rolling water tank system intended to provide a smooth, stable ride even in rough seas. In July of 1909, she set sail from London on only her second round-trip voyage, carrying 92 passengers and a crew of 119 south toward Australia. The outward journey was uneventful, but the return leg, heading north from Durban, South Africa, to Cape Town, would become one of maritime history's most infamous short trips. On the evening of July 26th, the Waratah was spotted by the captain of another ship, the Harlow, as both vessels made their way up the coast. It was a brief, ordinary sighting in the gathering gloom. The next morning, the Waratah was expected to be seen from the shore near Cape Town. She never appeared. No distress signal was ever received. The ship and all 211 souls aboard had utterly vanished. The immediate response was one of disbelief, followed by one of the most extensive sea searches of the pre-war era. The British Royal Navy deployed multiple cruisers to scour the 1,000-mile stretch of coastline between Durban and Cape Town. They searched for wreckage, for lifeboats, for bodies, for any sign at all. They found nothing. The sea had swallowed the Waratah whole. The official inquiry that followed was hamstrung by this complete lack of physical evidence. Without a wreck to examine, investigators were forced to rely on anecdotal accounts, and these accounts pointed toward a potentially fatal flaw in the ship's design. Several passengers from the outbound voyage to Australia had written letters home expressing concern about the Waratah's stability. They reported that she felt top-heavy and rolled excessively in a way that was unnerving even for seasoned travelers. One passenger, a respected engineer named Claude Sawyer, was so alarmed by the ship's behavior that he actually disembarked in Durban, sending a telegram to his wife that simply read, "Thought Waratah top-heavy." Landed Durban, He later testified that he had seen the ship struggle to right herself after leaning into a roll, a terrifying sign of poor metacentric height, the fundamental measure of a ship's stability. This testimony fueled the leading theory that the Waratah was catastrophically unstable. The very anti-rolling tanks meant to steady her may have been part of the problem if they malfunctioned or were not properly managed. The coastline she was sailing, known as the Wild Coast, is notorious for its weather. It is where the warm Agulhas current flowing southward meets the fierce winds and storm systems coming up from the Antarctic, creating conditions ripe for freak waves of monstrous size. The theory goes that the Waratah, already tender, encountered a rogue wave or a series of extreme waves that she simply could not recover from. A single, massive wall of water could have slammed into her side, causing a catastrophic shift in her heavy cargo of lead concentrate and frozen meat, leading to a sudden, irreversible capsize. Such an event could have happened so quickly that there was no time to send a distress call, the ship plunging to the seabed in minutes and leaving no trace on the surface. Yet the complete absence of any wreckage, no life jackets, no wooden debris, no floating cargo, has always been a profound puzzle. Even a ship that sinks quickly typically leaves some evidence behind. This has given rise to alternative, more speculative theories. Some suggest a massive, sudden structural failure, perhaps an explosion in one of her boilers that tore the ship apart so violently that it sank immediately. Others point to the possibility of a submarine landslide triggering a tsunami-like wave, a rare but geologically possible event on that particular continental shelf. The mystery has been kept alive by periodic bursts of hope and modern technology. In the 1990s and again in 2004, teams using advanced side-scan sonar claimed to have found wreckage matching the Waratah's dimensions in extremely deep water off the Wild Coast. However, subsequent expeditions failed to conclusively verify these finds, and no definitive identification has ever been made. The deep canyons of the seabed in that region are a treacherous and complex landscape, a perfect hiding place for a secret the ocean does not wish to give up. The fate of the SS Waratah remains a stark reminder that even in an age of steam and steel, the ocean holds the ultimate power of mystery, a void that can erase a giant of human engineering without leaving a single solvable clue. Our journey now takes us from the cold, hard facts of naval disasters to a concept born from science but raised on mysticism, a legend that perfectly illustrates how a rational idea can evolve into something truly extraordinary. This is the strange and captivating story of Lemuria, a lost continent that began its life not in ancient myth, but in the lecture halls of 19th century science, only to escape into the realm of occult fantasy. To understand how this happened, we need to step back into a world before the theory of plate tectonics was accepted. In the 1860s, a zoologist named Philip Sclater was grappling with a fascinating puzzle. He noticed that fossils of a small, primitive primate called a lemur were found in both Madagascar and India, but were curiously absent from the rest of Africa and the Middle East. How could these creatures have crossed such vast expanses of ocean? The prevailing scientific wisdom of the time held that land bridges, now submerged, had once connected continents. Sclater proposed an elegant solution, a vast, sunken landmass that had once spanned the Indian Ocean, connecting India, Madagascar, and possibly even stretching to Southeast Asia. He named this hypothetical continent Lemuria after the lemurs whose distribution it seemed to explain. For a few decades, Lemuria was a respectable, if unproven, scientific hypothesis, discussed seriously by geologists and biologists as a way to explain numerous oddities in the fossil and species record. It was a convenient land bridge, a ghost continent invoked to solve a practical problem. But just as a scientist's rational proposal was gaining traction, a very different kind of thinker saw in it a grander, more mystical potential. The key figure in this transformation was Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, the charismatic and controversial co-founder of the Theosophical Society. In her seminal work, The Secret Doctrine, published in 1888, Blavatsky took the dry, geological concept of Lemuria and infused it with cosmic significance. She wove it into an elaborate cosmology of root races, claiming that humanity had evolved through a series of stages, each associated with a different lost continent. Lemuria, in her system, was the home of the third root race. She described the Lemurians not as simple primates, but as giant, egg-laying hermaphrodites with a third eye in the back of their skulls and psychic abilities. They were a spiritually primitive but physically powerful race who communicated through telepathy and coexisted with dinosaurs. According to Blavatsky, this continent met a cataclysmic end through volcanic eruptions and sinking land, clearing the way for the more spiritually advanced fourth root race, the Atlanteans, and eventually our own, the fifth root race, the Aryans. Blavatsky's fantastical narrative, while dismissed by scientists, was a runaway success in spiritualist and occult circles. The Theosophical Society grew into a global movement, and its reinterpretation of Lemuria captured the imagination of a late Victorian audience fascinated by the occult, the exotic, and alternative histories. The legend was further popularized by other esoteric writers, most notably the British occultist James Churchward, who, as we discussed with Mu, claimed to have discovered ancient tablets describing lost continents. In his writings, Lemuria and Mu often became blended together into a single Pacific paradise. What made Blavatsky's version so enduring was its appeal to a desire for a lost golden age of spiritual wisdom. It presented a history where humanity was once more psychically attuned and connected to the cosmos, a narrative that offered an alternative to both traditional religion and what some saw as the cold, mechanistic worldview of modern science. The final, decisive blow to the scientific Lemuria came in the 1960s with the widespread acceptance of the theory of plate tectonics. This revolutionary understanding of Earth's geology provided a much more elegant explanation for the distribution of species like the lemur. Instead of land bridges sinking into the ocean, the continents themselves were slowly drifting. Around 160 million years ago, Madagascar and India were indeed part of the same landmass attached to the supercontinent Gondwana. As Gondwana broke apart, India drifted northward to collide with Asia, while Madagascar remained off the coast of Africa. The lemurs were simply passengers on these giant continental rafts, their distribution a result of geological divorce, not the drowning of a continent. With this new paradigm, Lemuria was rendered completely obsolete in scientific circles, a fascinating footnote in the history of science. Yet the legend did not die. It simply migrated from the pages of academic journals to the fertile ground of New Age spirituality. Stripped of its racist and outdated theosophical specifics in many modern interpretations, Lemuria persists as a powerful metaphor. It represents a prelapsarian world, a time of global harmony, advanced psychic abilities, and a deep connection to the Earth. You will find references to Lemuria in channeled texts, crystal healing practices, with certain crystals like Lemurian seed quartz being touted as direct artifacts from that age, and in ideologies that promote a return to a more intuitive, goddess-worshipping, and ecologically balanced way of life. The sunken continent has become a spiritual homeland, a place where the secrets of Atlantis were first learned and then lost. The journey of Lemuria is a remarkable case study in the life of an idea. It shows how a hypothesis designed to answer a specific zoological question can be adopted, adapted, and transformed to fulfill a deep, enduring human need for meaning, for a history that is more magical than the one written in stone and fossil. It proves that a continent can sink twice, first from the ocean, and then from the realm of fact into the enduring world of legend. But even as the Flying Dutchman sailed into legend and the Waratah disappeared into the fog of the 20th century, another story was unfolding that would become the ultimate archetype of the lost scientific expedition. This is a tale that begins not in the shadows of myth, but in the bright light of the Enlightenment, a mission embodying the highest ideals of reason and discovery, only to meet a fate as dark and mysterious as any ancient curse. We arrive now at the eve of the French Revolution and the story of one of history's most talented and unfortunate explorers, Jean-François de Galaup, Comte de la Pérouse. King Louis XVI of France was an ardent supporter of science and exploration, and he had a very specific and very personal model for success, the legendary British captain James Cook. Cook's voyages had not only expanded the British Empire's map, but had also brought immense prestige through their scientific contributions. Louis wanted France to have its own Cook, and he personally chose La Pérouse for this monumental task. La Pérouse was a seasoned naval officer, a veteran of the American Revolutionary War who had distinguished himself through both bravery and intellect. The king gave him an assignment of breathtaking scope. With two specially outfitted ships, the Astrolabe and the Boussole, La Pérouse was to sail around the world for 4 years, completing the maps of the Pacific that Cook had left unfinished, establishing new trade relations, and conducting a sweeping survey of the natural world, from the icy waters of Alaska to the tropical islands of the South Pacific. This was to be a voyage of pure enlightenment, with a team of scientists on board including astronomers, botanists, geologists, and cartographers. Their mission was knowledge, not conquest. The expedition set sail from Brest in August 1785 to great public fanfare. For the next 3 years, La Pérouse meticulously followed his orders. He mapped the treacherous coast of Alaska, where he lost 21 men in a boating accident, a tragedy that deeply affected him. He sailed south to California, then across the Pacific to Macau, Formosa, and Korea, lands seldom visited by Europeans. He explored the remote and mysterious shores of Sakhalin and the Kuril Islands, sending back detailed reports and maps that were the envy of the maritime world. His correspondence, dispatched from various ports, was filled with meticulous observations, cultural insights, and a growing sense of accomplishment. The final dispatches were sent from Botany Bay in Australia in January 1788. Ironically, he arrived just days after the British First Fleet had established a penal colony there. He noted the presence of the British ships, restocked his own supplies, and sent his journals and letters back to Europe on a British vessel, assuring his superiors that he would next explore the Santa Cruz Islands and then head towards New Caledonia. Then he sailed out of Botany Bay and vanished. For 40 years, the fate of La Pérouse was one of the great unsolved mysteries of the age. The French Revolution erupted, King Louis XVI was guillotined, and empires rose and fell, but the question remained: what had happened to the 2 ships and their 225 men? The French government, even in its revolutionary turmoil, was desperate for answers. In 1791, they dispatched a search expedition under the command of Rear Admiral Bruni d'Entrecasteaux. His 2 ships scoured the Pacific from the Solomon Islands to New Caledonia to Van Diemen's Land, but they found nothing. It was as if the sea had opened up and swallowed the entire expedition whole. The mystery only deepened with time, becoming a national obsession. The breakthrough finally came not from a grand naval search, but from a chance encounter decades later. In 1826, an Irish sandalwood trader named Peter Dillon was operating in the Fiji Islands when he noticed something peculiar. A native Fijian sailor aboard his ship was using a silver sword guard as a simple eating utensil. When Dillon inquired about it, the man said it came from his home island of Vanikoro in the Santa Cruz group, and that it had belonged to white men, whose big ships had been wrecked there many years before. Intrigued, Dillon managed to acquire more artifacts from the island, including a bronze ship's bell bearing a French inscription. He was certain he had found a trace of the lost La Pérouse expedition. He sailed to Calcutta and convinced the British authorities to fund a proper investigation. Returning to Vanikoro in 1827, Dylan pieced together the tragic story from the elderly islanders who had been children at the time of the disaster. The tale they told was one of catastrophe. The two French ships had been caught in a terrible storm and driven onto the fringing reefs of Vanikoro. One ship, likely the Bowsole, was smashed to pieces almost immediately and its crew was lost. The other ship, the Astrolabe, was more fortunate, managing to be wedged on the reef in a way that allowed at least some of the crew to survive and make it ashore, salvaging supplies and even building a small, makeshift fort and a two-masted boat from the wreckage. For months, the survivors lived on the island, apparently coexisting, at least initially, with the local population, but the situation seems to have deteriorated. The islanders spoke of subsequent conflicts, and eventually the survivors decided to attempt an escape. Using their newly built boat, they set sail from Vanikoro, hoping to reach a European settlement. They were never seen again. The few men who remained behind on the island, either too sick or injured to travel, eventually died, their fate swallowed by the jungle. The islanders, over time, salvaged what they could from the wrecks, incorporating iron tools, silver, and other objects into their own culture. Modern archaeological expeditions to Vanikoro, beginning in the 1960s and continuing to this present day, have confirmed and enriched Dylan's findings. Divers have located the wreck sites on the reef, uncovering cannons, anchors, navigational instruments, and personal items like porcelain tableware and surgical tools, all consistent with an 18th-century French scientific voyage. The evidence paints a heartbreakingly clear picture of a sophisticated mission brought to a sudden and brutal end by the elemental power of the Pacific. The story of La Pérouse is a profound tragedy of the Age of Enlightenment. It represents the collision between the highest aspirations of science and the unforgiving reality of the natural world. His expedition was a monument to human curiosity, a voyage designed to illuminate the dark corners of the map. That its final chapter was written not in a logbook, but in the oral history of a remote island and the silent artifacts on a coral reef, serves as a powerful and poignant reminder that even the most carefully laid plans can be undone by the caprice of the wind and the waves. But the sea holds more than just the ghosts of lost ships and explorers. It is home to ancient terrors that live and breathe in the crushing darkness. For our next legend, we venture away from maps and into the realm of pure primal fear, a place where the line between reality and nightmare blurs into a churning foam. We are talking about the Kraken, the monstrous leviathan of the deep that has haunted the dreams of sailors for over 1,000 years. This is not a story of a lost voyage, but of an encounter with something so alien and immense that it threatened to rewrite humanity's understanding of what lurked beneath the waves. The earliest tales of the Kraken emerge from the frigid waters of Scandinavia, with the word itself deriving from the Old Norse kraki, meaning a twisted or malformed animal. But the creature described in medieval texts was far more than a simple animal. It was a living island. Norwegian natural history texts from the 18th century describe a beast so vast that when it surfaced, its massive body could be mistaken for land, tempting sailors to drop anchor on its back. It was said to possess arms or tentacles long enough to encircle the largest warship and strong enough to drag it down into the abyss. The Kraken's most terrifying power was its ability to create a deadly whirlpool by suddenly submerging, sucking ships and their crews down to a watery grave. These stories were not just campfire tales, they were recorded in sailors' logs and scholarly accounts as genuine hazards of northern navigation, a very real peril noted alongside storms and reefs. So, what were these hardened seafarers actually seeing? The answer lies with one of the ocean's most elusive and spectacular creatures, the giant squid Architeuthis dux. For centuries, the giant squid was as mythical as the Kraken itself. The only evidence of its existence were the occasional, grotesque remains that washed ashore, enormous beaks and tentacles that hinted at a creature of staggering proportions. We now know that the giant squid can grow to lengths of over 40 feet, with eyes the size of dinner plates, perfectly adapted for seeing in the perpetual midnight of the deep sea. A chance encounter with such a beast would have been a truly traumatic event for sailors in a wooden ship. Imagine the horror of seeing a pale, ghostly arm, thicker than a man's body and lined with savage suckers, slithering over the gunwale. The sheer scale and alien appearance of the squid would have been so far outside any normal experience that it could only be processed through the lens of mythology, transforming a rare zoological encounter into a battle with a sea demon. But the legend of the kraken is about more than just misidentified fauna. It is a profound window into the psychology of the pre-modern sailor. To understand why these stories took such a powerful hold, you have to put yourself in their world. These men spent months, sometimes years, on the open ocean in small, fragile vessels. Their world was defined by vast, empty horizons by day and an impenetrable blackness by night, broken only by the eerie glow of bioluminescence in the ship's wake. In this environment, the mind plays tricks: sleep deprivation, malnutrition, and the constant, low-grade terror of an environment that could kill you in an instant fostered a state of heightened superstition. Every strange sound, every unusual ripple on the water, could be a sign of something monstrous. The kraken became the ultimate embodiment of all those fears, a tangible monster onto which they could project the existential dread of the deep. It was the sea's final argument, a reminder that no matter how skilled a navigator you were, there were forces in the depths that you could neither chart nor control. This blending of reality and mythology served a crucial cultural purpose. Tales of the kraken functioned as vital cautionary tales, a form of oral maritime safety protocol. Stories told by grizzled old sailors to wide-eyed new recruits about ships that vanished without a trace, pulled under by a creature with arms like serpents, reinforced the dangers of the profession. They encouraged vigilance, respect for the ocean, and perhaps a certain caution about sailing into waters that were too deep or too unknown. The legend was a way of codifying the very real dangers of the sea: unpredictable weather, treacherous currents, and uncharted obstacles into a single, memorable monster. It was easier to fear a creature than to fear the faceless, immense power of the ocean itself. The fascinating conclusion to this centuries-old mystery is that reality has, in many ways, surpassed the myth. While the giant squid was the likely inspiration, we now know of an even larger cephalopod that prowls the deep, the colossal squid Mesenichotuthis hamiltoni. This creature is heavier, more robust, and equipped with swiveling hooks on its tentacle clubs, making it a truly formidable predator. The existence of such animals, confirmed only through rare footage and specimens recovered from the stomachs of sperm whales, proves that the ancient sailors were not entirely wrong. The deep sea does hold monsters, even if they are biological rather than supernatural. The legend of the kraken endures because it speaks to a fundamental human truth. The ocean is the last great wilderness on our planet, a place of profound mystery where the line between what we know and what we imagine will always be as fluid as the sea itself. Yet, even as the story of Lapérouse demonstrated the power of modern archaeology to solve a centuries-old mystery, our next legend presents a case where science has not only illuminated the past but also deepened its profound and chilling tragedy. We journey now to the pinnacle of 19th century British confidence, to the year 1845, when the Royal Navy, the undisputed master of the seas, launched its most ambitious attempt to conquer the last great remaining puzzle of global navigation, the Northwest Passage. This is the harrowing story of the Franklin expedition, a venture that began as a national triumph and ended in a silence so absolute it would haunt the Victorian age. The mission was the brainchild of Sir John Franklin, a seasoned, if somewhat aging, Arctic explorer. His two ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, were not ordinary vessels. They were bomb ships built with incredibly strong, reinforced hulls to withstand the recoil of heavy mortars. They had been further fortified for the Arctic with iron plating on their bows, steam engines salvaged from railway locomotives to provide auxiliary power, and internal heating systems, the cutting-edge technology of their day. They were provisioned for a 3-year journey with an immense quantity of canned food, a relatively new preservation method that was thought to guarantee their sustenance. With a crew of 129 hand-picked officers and men, Franklin's expedition was the best equipped, most technologically advanced polar mission ever to set sail. When they departed from Greenland in July 1845, spotted by whaling ships for the last time, expectations in Britain were sky-high. The Northwest Passage, a lucrative trade route over the top of North America, was considered all but found. Then nothing. For 2 years there was no word. This was not immediately alarming given the planned duration of the voyage, but by 1848 concern turned to panic. The disappearance of such a powerful expedition sparked the largest manhunt in Arctic history, with over 30 search parties, publicly and privately funded, scouring the vast, icy labyrinth of the Canadian archipelago over the next decade. The searchers found only grim, cryptic clues. On a desolate beach on King William Island, they discovered a stone cairn, a man-made pile of rocks left by Franklin's crews. Nearby were the graves of 3 sailors, buried with touching formality in the frozen ground. But the most significant find was a single handwritten note, sealed in a metal cylinder and left in another cairn. Dated 25 April 1848, it contained 2 messages. The first, from 1847, was brief and optimistic. The second, scrawled in the margins a year later, was a chilling summary of catastrophe. It reported that the ships had been trapped in ice for a year and a half, that Sir John Franklin had died in June 1847, and that 24 other men had perished. The remaining 105 survivors, led by Captain Francis Crozier, were abandoning the ships on 22 April 1848 to march south toward the Back River on the Canadian mainland, hoping to find a fur trading outpost. It was a death march into one of the most barren landscapes on Earth. The note ended with the tragic, understated phrase, "And start on tomorrow, 26th, for Back's Fish River." For over a century and a half, this note was the only definitive evidence of the expedition's fate. The mystery was compounded by stories told by Inuit hunters to the search parties. They spoke of seeing a ship sink in deep water and of another being crushed by ice. They told of starving, desperate white men dragging a boat across the ice, and of campsites where the dead were found, some with clear evidence of the final taboo, cannibalism. Cut marks on human bones recovered from these sites confirmed the Inuit accounts, painting a picture of a descent into utter despair. But where were the ships? The wrecks of the Erebus and Terror became the holy grail of Arctic archaeology, their locations a secret held fast by the icy waters. The modern chapter of this story began in the 1980s when a team of researchers, led by forensic anthropologist Owen Beatty, exhumed the 3 well-preserved bodies from the Beechey Island graves. Autopsies revealed something startling. The men had levels of lead in their bodies that were off the charts. The source was traced to the expedition's technology. The thousands of cans of food, supplied by a contractor who had cut corners, were sealed with lead solder. The ship's sophisticated water distillation systems, which provided fresh water from melted ice, also contained lead components. The entire crew was being slowly, unknowingly poisoned. Lead poisoning causes a range of debilitating symptoms: fatigue, abdominal pain, paralysis, and most critically, mental confusion and erratic behavior. The men making life or death decisions in the harsh Arctic environment were likely suffering from impaired judgment, a factor that may have doomed their survival plans from the start. The final, monumental breakthrough came in the 21st century. Using a combination of Inuit oral history and advanced sonar technology, Parks Canada launched a renewed search. In 2014, the wreck of HMS Erebus was discovered on the seabed, remarkably intact. 2 years later, HMS Terror was found, sitting upright in even better condition, as if frozen in time. The exploration of these underwater time capsules has been ongoing, and the discoveries are breathtaking. Divers have found plates still on shelves, beds made, and scientific instruments in place. The ships are so well preserved that written documents may still exist in the cold, dark, oxygen-poor water, potentially holding the key to the expedition's final days. The discoveries have largely corroborated the Inuit stories, proving the incredible accuracy of their oral history passed down through generations. The fate of the Franklin expedition is therefore a multi-layered tragedy. It was a failure of technology, as the very innovations meant to ensure their survival, the canned food and the water systems, likely contributed to their physical and mental decline. It was a failure of Victorian hubris, an overconfidence in their ability to master a supremely hostile environment with sheer British pluck. And it is a story of immense human suffering, of men slowly succumbing to scurvy, starvation, and lead poisoning, forced to make impossible choices in the face of certain death. The discovery of the ships has not closed the book on the mystery. Instead, it has opened a new one, allowing us to piece together the final, agonizing chapter of one of history's most compelling and tragic voyages of exploration. And so we arrive at the final legend on our voyage, the one that has cast the longest shadow over our imagination, the story that stands as the ultimate archetype of a glorious civilization lost to the sea. We come now to Atlantis. It is a name that resonates like a deep, submerged bell, evoking images of crystalline spires, advanced technology, and a cataclysm of unimaginable scale. But to understand its true power, we must first journey back not to the ocean floor, but to the sun-drenched courtyards of ancient Athens, where the story was first committed to parchment by the philosopher Plato around 360 BC. Plato did not present Atlantis as a mere myth or a folk tale. In his dialogues, the Timaeus and the Critias, he introduces it through a chain of supposedly historical accounts. He has his relative, Critias, recount a story told to his grandfather by the Athenian lawgiver Solon, who in turn heard it from Egyptian priests in the city of Sais. These priests, guardians of ancient records far older than any in Greece, described a mighty empire that existed 9,000 years before Solon's time. They called it Atlantis, a vast island continent located beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we know as the Strait of Gibraltar in the Atlantic Ocean. This was no primitive society. Plato paints a picture of astonishing wealth and sophistication. The city of Atlantis itself was a marvel of engineering, built in concentric rings of land and water, connected by great canals and bridges. It was adorned with temples plated in gold, silver, and the mysterious metal orichalcum, which gleamed like fire. The Atlanteans possessed a powerful navy that allowed them to dominate the Mediterranean, conquering lands as far as Egypt and Italy. They were, in Plato's telling, the ultimate antagonists, a thriving and ambitious people whose only flaw was their own hubris. Their moral decay began when their divine ancestry became diluted with mortal stock, and they grew arrogant and aggressive, seeking to enslave all of the known world. It was then that the gods decided to punish them. In a single, terrible day and night of earthquakes and floods, the entire island of Atlantis was swallowed by the sea, vanishing forever. Plato's purpose in telling this story was almost certainly allegorical. Atlantis served as a dramatic counterpoint to his ideal state, Athens, which heroically repelled the Atlantean invasion before succumbing to its own natural disasters. The tale was a powerful moral lesson about the dangers of imperial overreach and the inevitable downfall of societies that abandon virtue for power and greed. This clear allegorical framing, however, has done little to quell 24 centuries of speculation. The central question has always been, did Plato invent Atlantis whole cloth as a philosophical device, or was he embellishing a memory of a real historical catastrophe? The most compelling and widely supported scientific theory points to a dramatic event that shook the Mediterranean world 1,000 years before Plato was born: the catastrophic eruption of the volcano on the island of Thera, modern-day Santorini. Around 1600 BC, Thera, which was the heart of the sophisticated Minoan civilization, exploded with a force estimated to be 4 times more powerful than the eruption of Krakatoa. The eruption obliterated much of the island, creating the massive caldera we see today. It would have generated tsunamis hundreds of feet high that radiated outward, devastating the coastal cities of the Minoans on Crete, about 70 miles to the south. Archaeological evidence shows that the great Minoan palace complexes at Knossos and elsewhere were severely damaged by earthquake and fire around this time, leading to the rapid decline of this advanced seafaring culture. The parallels are striking. The Minoans were a wealthy naval power with complex architecture and vibrant art, much like Plato's Atlanteans. Their sudden collapse, triggered by a geological cataclysm of biblical proportions, fits the description of a civilization falling in a single day and night. Over centuries, the memory of this disaster could have been distorted and magnified. Its timeline stretched and its location shifted westward in the retelling, eventually reaching Plato as the legend of a lost continent in the Atlantic. Yet the Thera theory is not a perfect fit. Plato was very specific about Atlantis's location, outside the Mediterranean in the Atlantic Ocean. This has led explorers and theorists to search the globe, from the Azores to the Bahamas, from Antarctica to the North Sea. Ignatius Donnelly's 1882 book, Atlantis, The Antediluvian World, argued seriously that Atlantis was a real continent in the mid-Atlantic, and that all ancient civilizations were the offspring of its survivors. His work captured the public imagination and sparked a wave of Atlantean speculation that continues to this day. The famous psychic Edgar case channeled detailed descriptions of Atlantis, predicting that its records would be discovered near Bimini in the Bahamas. Some have even tried to link Atlantis to the Richat structure in Mauritania, a striking natural geological formation that, from above, resembles Plato's concentric rings. The sheer diversity of these proposed locations reveals less about Atlantis and more about ourselves. It has become a blank screen onto which we project our own fantasies of a lost golden age. Ultimately, the true legacy of Atlantis may not be found on any map. Its power lies in its profound adaptability as a symbol. For mystics, it represents a utopian society with psychic powers and advanced technology that we have since forgotten. For archaeologists, it is a tantalizing folk memory of a real Bronze Age collapse. For environmentalists, it is a stark warning about the fragility of civilization in the face of natural disaster, a parable that feels increasingly relevant in our age of climate change. It is the ultimate what-if. The story of Atlantis taps into a deep, almost primal human anxiety about the impermanence of our own achievements. Every time we uncover the ruins of a great city swallowed by desert sands or sunk beneath a rising sea, we see a flicker of Atlantis. It is the ghost of every culture that believed itself eternal, only to be reclaimed by the earth or the ocean. And so, as our own voyage of 25 legends comes to an end, we are left not with an answer but with a reflection. The sea keeps its secrets well, not because it is malicious, but because it is timeless. It has witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the daring of explorers, and the birth of stories that we tell to make sense of the vast, unknown depths that still surround us. The legends we have explored are more than just mysteries. They are a fundamental part of our relationship with the ocean, a testament to the enduring human spirit of curiosity, and a haunting reminder that the greatest discoveries often lie not in what we find, but in the endless wonder of the search itself. And so, our voyage through these 25 legends comes to an end. We have sailed from the sun-scorched docks of ancient Egypt to the foggy shores of Cornwall, from the vast emptiness of the Pacific to the crushing ice of the Arctic. We have encountered phantom islands that teased sailors with their mirages, and we have stood on the decks of ghost ships whose silence speaks volumes. These stories, while often shrouded in the mists of time, are far more than simple campfire tales. They are the echoes of real human courage, ambition, and at times heartbreaking folly. They remind us that the map of human history is still filled with blank spaces, not because we have stopped exploring, but because the ocean, in its immense and ancient power, is the ultimate keeper of secrets. What binds these legends together is not just the theme of loss, but the profound duality of the sea itself. For every explorer it rewarded with a new discovery, it claimed a dozen others, swallowing their stories whole. The ocean is both a gateway and a graveyard, a provider of life and a bringer of death. It represents the very essence of the unknown, a frontier that has challenged humanity for millennia. The tales of Lyonesse and Wise speak to our deep-seated fear of being overwhelmed by nature, while the quests for High Brasil and El Dorado reveal our endless capacity for hope and our thirst for wonders beyond the horizon. The disappearances of the Warata and the Mary Celeste force us to confront the limits of our own understanding, even in an age of technology. These legends are a conversation we have been having with the deep for centuries, a way of giving a name and a shape to the formless dangers and tantalizing possibilities that lie beyond the breakers. Perhaps the most enduring legacy of these mysteries is what they tell us about ourselves. The human spirit possesses an irrepressible drive to push beyond the known, to see what lies over the next wave. This curiosity is our greatest asset, but it is often paired with a vulnerability, to hubris, to desperation, to the simple, cruel whims of weather and fate. The story of the Flying Dutchman is a timeless warning against defying the natural order, while the tragedy of the Franklin expedition shows how even the best-laid plans can unravel in the face of the unforgiving elements. These narratives are not just about the past, they are mirrors reflecting our own relationship with the unknown. They ask us how far we would go in pursuit of a dream and what price we would be willing to pay. As we lower the sails on this particular journey, the question remains, which of these legends captured your imagination the most? Was it the technological possibility of St. Brendan's Currach, the staggering scale of Zheng He's treasure ships, or the intimate, chilling mystery of the three keepers on the Flannan Isles? The sea of history is vast, and we have only skimmed the surface. There are countless more stories waiting in the depths. If you enjoyed this expedition into the shadows of history, be sure to let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to join us on the next adventure, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Until then, keep looking to the horizon. The greatest mysteries are still out there, waiting for the next curious soul to set sail.